The revolver felt cold against Clara Whitmore's palm as she stood behind the counter, watching the man who'd just asked to court her. Her heart hammered like a trapped bird. This was the moment she'd feared for 5 years. Someone asking her to risk everything again. "I can't," she whispered, voice breaking. "But before you find out whether love survives in the brutal frontier town of Red Hollow, I need you to do something. Hit that like button right now. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And buckle in, because what happens next will change everything." The Widow of Red Hollow. The mercantile bell chimed as the door swung shut behind old Bill Patterson, his arms loaded with supplies enough to last his ranch through another hard Montana winter. Clara Whitmore watched him disappear into the dusty street, then turned to face the silent rows of shelves that had become both her prison and her sanctuary. 5 years. 5 years since Thomas died, and still the ghost of him haunted every corner of the shop. In the ledgers where his careful handwriting turned shaky in those final months. In the worn floorboards he'd walked 1,000 times. In the debts he'd left behind like shackles she couldn't unlock. "You closing soon, Clara?" The voice startled her from her thoughts. Mary Chen stood in the doorway, her kind face creased with concern. The Chinese laundress had been one of the few people in Red Hollow who'd shown Clara genuine friendship after Thomas's death, when most folks treated her like a tragic figure to be pitied from a safe distance. "Another hour," Clara replied, forcing brightness into her voice. "Need something?" "Just checking on you. You looked 1,000 miles away." Clara managed a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just tired. It's been a long day." Mary studied her with that penetrating gaze that saw too much. "Every day is long when you're carrying the world alone, my friend. When will you let someone help shoulder the load?" "I'm managing fine." "Managing isn't living." The words hit harder than Mary probably intended. Clara turned away, pretending to straighten already straight inventory. "I should finish these accounts before closing," Mary sighed, recognizing the dismissal for what it was. "Supper tomorrow? My place?" "Maybe. I'll see how I feel." After Mary left, Clara stood alone in the gathering dusk, listening to Red Hollow settle into its evening rhythms, the piano jangling from the Lucky Strike saloon, horses whinnying at the livery, distant laughter from the boarding house where the unmarried ranch hands stayed. Life happening all around her while she remained frozen in place, like a photograph slowly fading in the sun. She was 32 years old, and she felt ancient. The bell chimed again. Clara glanced up, ready to tell the latecomer she was closing, but the words died on her lips. The man in the doorway stood well over 6 feet, broad-shouldered and weathered in the way of men who'd spent years under open sky. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, his dark hair slightly too long beneath a battered Stetson. But it was his eyes that caught her, gray as winter storms and carrying a weight she recognized instinctively. This was a man who knew loss. "Evening, ma'am," he said, removing his hat. His voice was deep, rough-edged, but polite. "I apologize for the hour. Name's Ethan Calloway. I've just taken ownership of the old Brennan Ranch, about 8 miles north. Heard in town your establishment carries the best inventory in the territory." Clara found her professional mask settling into place, the one that let her interact with customers without really engaging. "The Brennan place? That's been abandoned for 3 years. "Yes, ma'am. Which means I've got 3 years of neglect to undo." A hint of a smile touched his weathered face. "I'll need supplies. Quite a bit of them." Despite herself, Clara's practical mind engaged. The Brennan Ranch had been substantial before old Jacob Brennan died, and his children scattered east. Getting it operational again would require serious resources, which meant serious business for her struggling mercantile. "I close in an hour," she said, "but I can start putting together a list if you tell me what you need most urgently." "I'd appreciate that, ma'am. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name." "Clara Whitmore. I own the mercantile." Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, though she didn't think they'd met before. She'd remember a man like this. "Mrs. Whitmore," he acknowledged with a slight nod that felt respectful rather than pitying. "I don't want to keep you past closing. Perhaps I could come back tomorrow with a proper list?" "Tomorrow's fine. Morning's better, fewer interruptions." "I'll be here at 8 if that suits." 8 o'clock, she confirmed. He settled his hat back on his head, nodded once more, and left. Clara watched him through the window as he crossed to a sturdy bay horse tied outside, swinging into the saddle with practiced ease. Then he was gone, disappearing into the blue twilight. Clara stood very still, unsettled in a way she couldn't quite name. Something about Ethan Calloway had penetrated the careful numbness she'd cultivated. She didn't like it. Shaking off the feeling, she locked the door and retreated to her small living quarters behind the shop. 2 rooms that held everything she owned, everything she'd become. She heated leftover stew, ate without tasting, and tried to lose herself in her ledgers. But the numbers blurred on the page, and she found herself thinking about storm gray eyes and the weight they carried. Ethan Calloway arrived at exactly 8 o'clock the next morning, and Clara had to admit she'd been watching the clock. She told herself it was professional courtesy, nothing more. He brought a detailed list, written in surprisingly neat handwriting, and together they walked the aisles while Clara pulled items and calculated costs. He asked intelligent questions about quality and durability, listened carefully to her recommendations, and treated her input with genuine respect, not the patronizing deference some men offered widows, but actual engagement with her expertise. "You know your inventory," he observed as she explained the difference between 2 types of axe handles. "I've been running this mercantile for 7 years, Clara replied, keeping her voice neutral. "You learn what works. But your husband taught you the business?" The question was casual, but Clara felt her walls slam up. "Yes." If Ethan noticed her clipped tone, he didn't show it. He simply nodded and moved on to the next item on his list. Clara felt simultaneously grateful and oddly disappointed that he didn't press. By the time they'd assembled everything he needed for his first major order, the morning sun was climbing high and the total had grown substantial. Clara tallied the numbers twice to be certain, then quoted him the amount. Ethan didn't flinch at the price. "Can you deliver it all by week's end? I'll pay half now, half on delivery." "I can have it out to you by Friday." "I'll pay the full amount now," he said, counting out cash with calloused hands. "You don't know me well enough to extend credit." Clara blinked in surprise. Most men would take advantage of credit if offered, especially newcomers still getting established. "That's not necessary." "It's fair," he said simply, meeting her eyes. "You're taking on extra work arranging delivery. Your time has value." Something twisted in Clara's chest. An unfamiliar sensation she finally identified as being seen, actually seen, not as a widow or a shopkeeper or a tragic figure, but as a person whose effort mattered. "Thank you," she managed. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitmore. I appreciate your help." He tipped his hat and headed for the door, then paused. "Would you be willing to make a standing order? I'll need regular supplies as I get the ranch operational." "Of course. Stop by whenever you're in town." "I'll do that." After he left, Clara stood amid the pulled inventory, feeling strangely off balance. She told herself it was just the prospect of reliable business, nothing more. The Brennan Ranch project could provide steady income for months, maybe longer. That's all this was, good business. She almost convinced herself. Ethan Calloway became a fixture over the following weeks. He came to town every few days, always polite, always respectful, conducting business with quiet efficiency. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, their interactions evolved beyond mere transactions. It started small. He'd mention a challenge he was facing at the ranch, and Clara would offer practical advice drawn from years of frontier living. She knew which lumber held up best in Montana winters, which feed kept horses healthiest, which tools would last versus which would break after a season. "You should have been a rancher yourself," Ethan said one morning after she'd explained the best way to reinforce a weakened barn beam. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "My husband and I talked about buying land once. Never worked out. But you know ranching. I know supplies. It's not the same thing." "Knowledge is knowledge," Ethan said. "Most people who sell supplies don't understand how they're actually used. You do. That's valuable." Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she changed the subject, asking about his progress on the ranch house. Ethan let her redirect the conversation, but she caught something in his expression, an awareness that she'd deflected and a patience that suggested he'd wait. The thought unsettled her. Red Hollow noticed, of course. Small frontier towns had little entertainment beyond observing each other's business, and a handsome widower paying regular attention to a widowed shopkeeper provided endless fodder for speculation. "I see Mr. Calloway's become quite the regular customer. Martha Hutchins observed pointedly one afternoon, her voice carrying across the mercantile for maximum audience. Several other customers' conversations quieted, everyone suddenly interested in examining boot polish or flour sacks while listening intently. "He's rebuilding the Brennan Ranch," Clara replied evenly. "Naturally, he needs supplies." Quite regularly, it seems. Clara kept her expression neutral, years of practice hiding her irritation. "Rebuilding a ranch is an ongoing project, Mrs. Hutchins. Was there something you needed today?" Martha sniffed, gathering her purchases with theatrical dignity. "Just making an observation." "People talk, dear." After Martha left, taking her audience with her, Clara allowed herself a moment of frustration. This was exactly why she'd kept herself isolated for 5 years. The moment anyone showed interest, the whole town assumed, speculated, judged. "Don't let Martha get under your skin." Clara turned to find Mary Chen watching from near the fabric section, having witnessed the entire exchange. "I'm fine," Clara said automatically. "You're always fine," Mary replied with gentle irony. "That's the problem." "What's that supposed to mean?" Mary approached the counter, lowering her voice. "It means you've been hiding behind fine for 5 years. Maybe Martha's a busybody, but she's not wrong. That man is interested in more than your inventory." "He's a customer, that's all." "Clara," Mary's voice held affectionate exasperation. "I've watched Ethan Calloway's face when he talks to you. That man doesn't look at flour sacks the way he looks at you." Clara's heart kicked in her chest. "You're imagining things." "Am I? When's the last time you actually looked at him instead of through him?" "I need to finish inventory," Clara said, retreating toward the back room. "Running away doesn't change the truth," Mary called after her, but Clara was already gone, seeking the safety of solitude in numbers that added up neatly, unlike the messy chaos of human connection. She tried to dismiss Mary's observations, but once planted, the seed grew. Clara found herself noticing details she'd previously overlooked, the way Ethan's eyes crinkled when he smiled, how his voice softened when he spoke to her, the fact that he always removed his hat indoors without being prompted. Small courtesies that spoke of careful upbringing, respect ingrained, and yes, the way he sometimes looked at her, like she was more than a shopkeeper, more than a widow, more than a ghost going through motions. It terrified her. One Thursday afternoon in late October, Ethan arrived carrying something wrapped in cloth. Clara was alone in the shop, the autumn light slanting golden through the windows. "I brought you something," he said, setting the bundle on the counter. Clara eyed it warily. "Mr. Calloway, I can't accept gifts. It's not a gift. It's payment for advice." He unwrapped the cloth to reveal a beautifully carved wooden box, about the size of a cigar box but far more elegant. The lid featured an intricate design, wildflowers and prairie grass, rendered in stunning detail. Clara's breath caught. "This is extraordinary. My grandfather taught me woodworking when I was a boy, kept me out of trouble during long winters." Ethan ran a finger along the edge of the box. "You've given me a lot of advice these past weeks, practical knowledge that saved me time and money. This seemed a fitting thank you." "I was just doing my job." "No," Ethan said quietly. "You went beyond that. You cared about helping me succeed, not just making a sale. There's a difference." Clara stared at the box, emotions swirling in her chest. Gratitude, fear, longing, panic. The craftsmanship represented hours of work, careful attention, thoughtfulness. This wasn't a customer thanking a shopkeeper. This was something else entirely. "I appreciate the gesture," she managed, "but really it's too much." Clara. Her name, spoken like that, gentle but firm, made her look up. Ethan was watching her with those storm-gray eyes, and she saw it clearly now, what Mary had tried to tell her. Interest, attraction. The unmistakable signs of a man drawn to a woman. "I should close early today," Clara said, her voice barely steady. "I'm not feeling well." Hurt flickered across Ethan's face, quickly masked. "Of course. I apologize if I've overstepped." "No, She couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't explain that his thoughtfulness was exactly the problem. That kindness was more dangerous than indifference. That she couldn't afford to want anything because wanting led to loss. Ethan collected his hat, his movements careful, controlled. I'll come back another time, when you're feeling better. He left without another word, leaving the wooden box on the counter like an accusation. Clara stood frozen until the bell's chime faded. Then she picked up the box with trembling hands. The wood was smooth, warm from his touch. She traced the carved wildflowers, Montana bluebells, Indian paintbrush, prairie smoke, flowers that survived in harsh conditions, blooming despite adversity. A message, she realized, or maybe a hope. She set the box down and pressed her palms against the counter, breathing hard. This was exactly what she'd feared. Someone getting close, someone caring, someone making her feel things she'd locked away where they couldn't hurt her anymore. That night, Clara lay awake in her small bed, staring at ceiling shadows and facing uncomfortable truths. She told herself she was protecting herself by staying isolated, that she was being practical, realistic. But Mary's words echoed in the darkness. Managing isn't living. Was she living or just existing? Going through familiar motions in a narrow circle, year after year, until she became as worn and faded as the shop's floorboards? The wooden box sat on her bedside table, visible in the moonlight streaming through her window. Ethan had spent hours creating something beautiful for her. Not to buy her favor or manipulate her emotions, but simply to acknowledge that she'd helped him. When was the last time anyone had truly seen her effort, her value, her humanity? Clara rolled over, pulling her quilt tight around her shoulders, but sleep remained elusive. Her carefully constructed walls were developing cracks, and she didn't know whether to repair them or let them crumble. A week passed. Then 2. Ethan didn't come to the mercantile. Clara told herself it was for the best. He'd gotten the message. She wasn't interested, wasn't available, wasn't willing to risk connection. He'd moved on. Perfect. Except it didn't feel perfect. It felt hollow. She found herself watching the door during hours when he typically visited, listening for his distinctive tread on the boardwalk. Disappointed when customers proved to be ranchers she'd known for years, not the man with storm gray eyes and calloused hands that could create beauty from wood. You look like someone stole your favorite horse, Mary observed one afternoon, catching Clara staring out the window. I'm fine. There's that word again. Mary set down the fabric she'd been examining. He hasn't been around. Clara didn't ask who. He probably found another supplier. Or maybe you scared him off by running away from something good. Mary, I know. You don't want to talk about it. Mary's voice gentled. But Clara, honey, you can't stay frozen forever. Thomas died. You didn't. There's a difference. The words landed like a slap. Clara felt tears prick her eyes, the first in months, maybe years. She'd gotten so good at not feeling, at skating along the surface of life without diving deep enough to drown. I loved him, Clara whispered. I know you did. He died and left me with debts I'm still paying. The shop nearly failed. I almost lost everything. The confession spilled out, raw and painful. For a year after he died, I woke up every morning wishing I could stop existing, stop fighting, stop surviving. It took everything I had to keep going. And you did keep going, Mary said softly. You survived something that would have broken most people. But Clara, there's a difference between surviving and healing. You've been in survival mode for 5 years. Maybe it's time to actually live again. What if I can't? The question emerged barely audible. What if I've forgotten how? Mary moved around the counter and pulled Clara into an embrace. Clara stood rigid for a moment, then sagged against her friend, letting someone else hold her weight for the first time in longer than she could remember. You haven't forgotten, Mary murmured. You're just scared, and scared is okay. Scared means you're feeling something again. Clara pulled back, wiping her eyes quickly. What if I let myself care and lose everything again? I barely survived it once. I don't think I could do it twice. Maybe you won't have to. Mary squeezed her hands. But Clara, you're losing something right now. You're losing time. Years of your life spent hiding behind these walls. Is that really safer than taking a risk on something real? The question haunted Clara for days. She moved through her routines mechanically, but Mary's words had lodged in her chest like a splinter she couldn't ignore. You're losing time. It was true. 5 years gone, vanished into the careful numbness she'd wrapped around herself like armor. 5 years of not living, not risking, not feeling. And what did she have to show for it? A barely profitable mercantile and a life so small she could walk its perimeter in minutes. She thought of Ethan's wooden box still sitting on her bedside table. She'd taken to running her fingers over the carved flowers at night, imagining his hands shaping the wood, choosing the design, thinking of her. 3 weeks after their last conversation, Clara made a decision. Bets. The ride to the Brennan Ranch took longer than expected. Clara wasn't an experienced rider, and the borrowed mare from the livery seemed to sense her nervousness, picking her way cautiously along the rutted trail. By the time the ranch buildings came into view, the afternoon sun was slanting low, painting everything gold and amber. Clara reined in at the edge of the property, suddenly questioning her entire plan. What was she doing? Riding out here uninvited, without warning, to say what exactly? Before she could turn back, movement caught her eye. Ethan emerged from the barn, leading a horse toward the corral. He moved with that easy confidence she remembered, completely in his element. Then he spotted her. He froze mid-step, clearly shocked. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other across the distance. Then Ethan tied off the horse and walked toward her, his expression carefully neutral. "Mrs. Whitmore." His voice was polite, professional, the same tone he'd use with any customer. It hurt more than Clara expected. She dismounted awkwardly, nearly stumbling. Ethan reached out to steady her, then withdrew his hand as if burned. "I'm sorry to arrive unannounced," Clara began, her prepared speech evaporating under his guarded gaze. "I wanted to, that is, I needed to. If you need to discuss business, I can come to the mercantile tomorrow," Ethan said, still in that painfully polite tone. "It's not about business." The words tumbled out. "I wanted to apologize for running away, for being rude when you gave me that beautiful box, for being afraid." Something flickered in Ethan's eyes. "You don't owe me an apology, ma'am." "Please don't call me ma'am like that, like I'm some stranger." Clara's voice cracked. "I know I made you feel like a stranger, but Clara," her name, soft now, the way he'd said it that day. "Why are you here?" "Because I've been hiding," she said, the truth spilling out faster than she could think. "For 5 years, I've been hiding behind work and routine and careful numbness because it felt safer than risking anything. And then you showed up with your respectful questions and your thoughtful gestures and your carved wildflowers, and you made me feel things I've been terrified to feel." Ethan stood very still, watching her with those storm-gray eyes that saw too much. "I lost my husband," Clara continued, her voice shaking now. "He died and left me alone with debts and a failing business, and grief so heavy I could barely breathe. It took everything I had to survive that. Everything. And I swore I'd never risk that kind of pain again." "So you built walls," Ethan said quietly. "Yes." Clara met his gaze. "High ones, strong ones, and they kept me safe. But Mary, my friend, she said something that's been haunting me. She said I'm not living, I'm just surviving. And she's right. I've been so focused on not losing anything that I haven't let myself have anything. Not really." "What are you saying, Clara?" She took a shaky breath. "I'm saying I'm scared. Terrified, actually. But I'm tired of being alone. I'm tired of just surviving. And I think maybe you might understand that. Because you've got that same look in your eyes, that weight. Like you know what loss feels like." Ethan's jaw tightened. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then, "I was married once. Sarah. She died in childbirth 4 years ago. The baby, too." Clara's heart clenched. "Ethan, I'm so sorry." "I came here to start over," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "To rebuild something with my hands, to focus on work instead of grief. I wasn't looking for anything else. But then I met you, and you were real. Not trying to fix me or pity me or push too hard. Just real. And I couldn't help but notice how carefully you held yourself, how controlled everything was, like you were afraid to take up space." "I was," Clara whispered. "I am." "You rode 8 miles out here," Ethan pointed out, a hint of warmth creeping into his voice. "That doesn't seem too afraid to me." "I'm terrified," Clara admitted. "My heart's beating so hard I think it might break through my chest. I have no idea what I'm doing or what I'm asking for. But I couldn't let you disappear without telling you that I'm sorry, that I wish I'd been braver, that maybe—" She couldn't finish. The words stuck in her throat, too big and frightening. Ethan closed the distance between them in 3 strides. He didn't touch her, but he was close enough that she could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes, the lines that grief and sun had carved into his face. "Maybe what?" he prompted gently. "Maybe we could try," Clara whispered, "being less alone. Together." His breath hitched. "Clara Whitmore, are you saying you'd consider letting me court you?" The formal phrasing should have felt antiquated, but instead it felt safe. A framework, rules, something to hold on to in the terrifying freefall of opening herself to possibility. "Yes," she said, her voice barely audible. "If you still want to. After I was so— Yes." The word came out fierce, certain. "God, yes. I've wanted to since the first time you explained the difference between axe handles, like it was the most important thing in the world. You're brilliant and brave and so damn beautiful it hurts to look at you sometimes." Clara felt tears spill over, but for once, they weren't tears of grief. "I don't know how to do this. I'm rusty and scared and probably going to mess everything up. That makes 2 of us," Ethan said with a crooked smile. "We'll figure it out together. Slow, careful, whatever pace you need. What if I panic again?" "Then you panic. And I'll wait until you're ready." He lifted his hand slowly, telegraphing the movement, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he cupped her cheek gently, his calloused thumb brushing away her tears. "I'm not going anywhere, Clara. Not unless you tell me to go." She leaned into his touch, letting someone comfort her for the first time in years. It felt foreign and familiar all at once, terrifying and necessary, like breathing after holding your breath too long. "Stay for supper," Ethan said softly. "Let me show you what I've done with the ranch, and then I'll ride back with you before dark. Make sure you get home safe." Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. As they walked toward the ranch house, Ethan's hand found hers, tentative, careful, but steady. Clara's fingers intertwined with his, and she felt something crack in her chest, not breaking, but opening, letting in light after years of darkness. Behind them, the Montana sun painted the sky in shades of gold and rose, and for the first time in 5 years, Clara Whitmore allowed herself to hope that tomorrow might be different than today. That survival might transform into something more, that she might, against all odds and every fear, get to live again. The ride back to Red Hollow happened in comfortable silence, broken only by the rhythmic clip of hooves and the occasional creak of leather. Ethan kept his horse close to Clara's, near enough that she could feel his presence, but not so close as to crowd her. Even in this, he understood boundaries, a quality that made her chest tighten with something dangerously close to tenderness. The sky had deepened to purple by the time they reached the edge of town, stars beginning to pierce through the gathering darkness. Ethan slowed his horse as they approached the mercantile's back entrance. "I'll see you safely inside," he said quietly. Clara dismounted with more grace this time, her legs trembling slightly from the unaccustomed riding. Ethan swung down from his own horse and walked her to the door, standing a respectful distance back while she fumbled with her keys in the dim light. "Clara," he said as she turned the lock. She looked back at him, and even in the shadows she could see the warmth in his expression. "Thank you for coming today, for being brave enough to try." "I'm still terrified," she admitted. "I know. So am I." He smiled slightly. "But maybe we can be terrified together." After he'd gone, Clara stood in her darkened shop for a long moment, her heart still racing. She'd done it. She'd actually ridden out to his ranch, confessed her fears, and agreed to let him court her. The magnitude of it settled over her like a heavy quilt, equal parts comforting and suffocating. Sleep came fitfully that night, her mind replaying every word, every look, every gentle touch. By morning, doubt had crept in with the dawn light. What had she been thinking? She'd opened a door she'd kept locked for years, and now there was no taking it back. The bell chimed at precisely 9 o'clock. Clara looked up from her inventory ledger to find Ethan standing in the doorway, hat in hand, looking uncertain in a way she'd never seen before. "Morning," he said. "I thought I'd stop by before heading back to the ranch. If that's all right." "Of course," Clara's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Did you need supplies?" "Actually, I was wondering if you might have time for coffee. There's a pot at the boarding house, and Mrs. Henderson makes decent biscuits." It was such a simple request, but Clara felt panic flutter in her chest. Coffee meant sitting together publicly, meant the whole town seeing them, meant speculation and gossip, and everyone knowing her business. Ethan must have read her expression because he added quickly, "Or not, we can just talk here if you'd prefer." Clara took a breath, fighting the urge to retreat into familiar patterns. This was what courtship meant, being seen together, letting people know they were trying something. She couldn't hide it and pursue it at the same time. "Coffee sounds nice," she managed. "Let me get my shawl." The walk to the boarding house took less than 5 minutes, but Clara felt every eye in Red Hollow, tracking their progress. Mrs. Henderson's establishment sat at the respectable end of town, a well-maintained building that housed bachelor ranch hands and the occasional traveling merchant. The proprietor herself was a formidable woman in her 60s, known for strict rules and excellent cooking. "Mr. Calloway, Mrs. Whitmore," Mrs. Henderson greeted them with barely concealed curiosity as they entered the dining room. Several men sat at various tables, eating breakfast and pretending not to stare. "Coffee for 2? Please," Ethan said. "And some of those biscuits if you have them." They settled at a corner table, and Clara fought the urge to catalog every whisper, every sideways glance. Ethan seemed unbothered by the attention, or at least better at hiding his discomfort. "You mentioned yesterday that you almost lost the mercantile after Thomas died," he said once Mrs. Henderson had brought their coffee. "What happened?" Clara wrapped her hands around the warm cup, grateful for something to hold on to. Thomas was better at ordering inventory than managing finances. He'd extended credit to half the town, and when he got sick, people just stopped paying. Some couldn't afford to. Some figured a widow wouldn't press them. By the time I understood how bad things were, we owed suppliers, owed the bank, owed everyone. "How did you manage to keep it?" "Sold everything we owned that wasn't essential. Our house, Thomas's tools, his hunting rifles, things I knew he'd want me to keep. I moved into the back rooms of the shop and worked 18-hour days for 2 years straight. The memories tasted bitter. I had to refuse credit to people who'd been Thomas's friends. Had to turn away folks who genuinely needed help. Made me real popular in town." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You did what you had to do to survive. Survival doesn't win you friends." Clara sipped her coffee. "For a while there, I was the heartless widow who'd rather see people starve than extend a little Christian charity. Never mind that I was eating 1 meal a day myself to save money. Is that why you've kept yourself so isolated?" The question was gentle but direct. Clara met his eyes. "Partly. After a while, it was just easier to keep everyone at arm's length. No expectations, no disappointments, no one close enough to hurt me or be hurt by my choices." "Sounds lonely." "It was. It is." She paused. "What about you? What brought you to Red Hollow specifically?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. "After Sarah died, I couldn't stay in Wyoming. Everything there reminded me of her, of the life we'd planned. I sold our place, spent a year drifting, trying to outrun the grief. Didn't work, obviously. You can't outrun what you carry inside." "No," Clara agreed softly. "You can't." "I heard about the Brennan Ranch through a land broker in Miles City. Figured rebuilding something from scratch might give me a purpose beyond just existing, a project big enough to require all my attention." "And has it? Given you purpose?" His gray eyes met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "It did. Until I met you. Now I'm not sure the ranch is enough anymore." The confession hung between them, honest and raw. Clara felt her heart hammering against her ribs, that familiar mixture of terror and longing that seemed to define every interaction with this man. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "How to let someone close again." "Then we'll figure it out as we go." Ethan reached across the table, his hand open in invitation. After a moment's hesitation, Clara placed her hand in his. His calloused fingers closed around hers gently, and she felt that same crack in her chest, the armor developing fissures. "No expectations, Clara, just 2 people spending time together, seeing where it leads." Before she could respond, the dining room door banged open and Martha Hutchins swept in, her sharp eyes immediately zeroing in on their joined hands. Clara started to pull away, but Ethan's grip tightened slightly. Not constraining, but steady. A reminder that she didn't have to hide. Well, Martha said, loudly enough to carry through the entire room, I suppose the rumors are true then. Clara felt heat flood her face, but Ethan's expression remained perfectly pleasant. Morning, Mrs. Hutchins. Lovely day, isn't it? Martha sniffed, clearly disappointed by their lack of embarrassment. I suppose congratulations are in order, though some might say it's rather quick, Mr. Calloway, having only been in town a few weeks. Some might say a lot of things, Ethan replied mildly. Doesn't make them true or relevant. The gentle rebuke landed perfectly. Martha's face pinched, but she couldn't quite formulate a response that wouldn't make her look petty. After an awkward pause, she turned sharply and marched toward Mrs. Henderson's kitchen, radiating disapproval. Clara stared at Ethan in amazement. She's going to tell everyone. Let her, Ethan said calmly. We're not doing anything wrong. Two adults having coffee isn't a scandal, no matter how much Martha wants it to be. You don't know how this town works. By noon, everyone will have heard some exaggerated version. Clara. He squeezed her hand. Do you care what Martha Hutchins thinks? She opened her mouth to say yes, then stopped. Did she care? Martha had been one of the worst gossips during Clara's hardest years, spreading stories about the cold widow who wouldn't help her neighbors. The woman's opinion had caused Clara real pain once, but now? Now Martha's disapproval felt hollow, meaningless. What mattered was the man sitting across from her, looking at her like she hung the moon, unashamed to be seen with her despite the whispers. No, Clara said slowly. I don't think I do. Ethan's smile was like sunrise. Good, because I plan on having coffee with you regularly, and I won't have you hiding like we're doing something shameful. The certainty in his voice steadied something inside Clara. This was what she'd been missing, someone willing to stand beside her publicly, to claim the connection without apology. Thomas had loved her, but he'd been gentle and non-confrontational, often letting others' opinions influence his decisions. Ethan was different. He knew his own mind and stood firm. They finished their coffee while conversation gradually resumed around them, the other diners losing interest once the initial shock wore off. When they finally left, Ethan walked her back to the mercantile, and this time Clara didn't flinch from the eyes that followed them. I need to get back to the ranch, Ethan said at her door. But I'll be in town again Thursday. May I take you to supper? At the boarding house? Clara asked, and was surprised to find herself smiling. Unless you'd prefer the Lucky Strike saloon. Here they serve a memorable steak, though the company's questionable. She laughed, an actual laugh that bubbled up, unexpected and genuine. The boarding house will be fine. Thursday at 6 then. He tipped his hat and turned to leave, then paused. Clara, you laughed. That's the first time I've heard you really laugh. I know, she said softly. It's been a while. The look he gave her was tender enough to make her chest ache. Then he was gone, swinging onto his horse and heading out of town, leaving Clara standing in her doorway, feeling more alive than she had in years. The rest of the day passed in a blur of customers and routine tasks, but Clara found herself smiling at odd moments, catching herself humming under her breath while restocking shelves. Mary stopped by in the afternoon and immediately noticed. You look different, Mary said, studying her friend with knowing eyes. I feel different, Clara admitted. Terrified, but different. He came back. I went to him, actually. Rode out to his ranch yesterday and told him I wanted to try. Mary's face lit up. Clara, I'm so proud of you. Don't be too proud yet. I might still panic and ruin everything. Or you might not, Mary countered. Give yourself some credit. You've already done the hardest part. You opened the door. Over the next week, Clara discovered that courtship was both easier and harder than she'd imagined. Easier because Ethan proved remarkably patient with her nervous uncertainty, never pushing too fast or demanding more than she could give. Harder because every step forward required her to confront fears she'd carefully buried. Their Thursday supper at the boarding house became a regular occurrence. Ethan would arrive in town, conduct whatever business needed attention at the mercantile, then return at 6 to escort her to dinner. They talked, really talked, about everything from childhood memories to frontier politics to their respective losses. Clara found herself sharing stories she hadn't told anyone, truths she'd kept locked away. Thomas used to bring me wildflowers, she said one evening over Mrs. Henderson's pot roast. Every week, no matter how busy he was, silly little bouquets that would wilt in a day, but I loved them. What was your favorite? Ethan asked. Indian paintbrush. The way the red catches the light. It's like holding sunset in your hand. The following Thursday, Ethan arrived with a carefully wrapped bundle. Inside were fresh-cut Indian paintbrush stems, their scarlet blooms vivid against the simple cloth. Clara's eyes filled with tears. You remembered. I remember everything you tell me, Ethan said simply. It was gestures like that, small, thoughtful, consistent, that gradually wore down her resistance. Ethan didn't make grand declarations or empty promises. Instead, he showed up. Every few days, he'd appear in town, finding reasons to stop by the mercantile even when he didn't strictly need supplies. He'd help her move heavy inventory, fix a stubborn shelf, or simply keep her company during slow afternoon hours. You don't have to keep finding excuses to visit, Clara told him one afternoon as he repaired a wobbly display table. You can just visit. Ethan looked up from his work, a slight smile playing at his lips. I know, but I figured you'd find it easier to accept help than admit you wanted company. He was right, and they both knew it. Clara was still learning how to want things openly, how to ask instead of deflect. But she was trying. The town adjusted to their courtship with varying degrees of acceptance. Some folks, like Mary and Mrs. Henderson, were genuinely happy for them. Others, like Martha Hutchins, maintained pointed disapproval. Most fell somewhere in between, curious, gossipy, but ultimately indifferent as long as proprieties were observed. What surprised Clara most was how little the gossip bothered her anymore. With Ethan beside her, solid and unshakable, the whispers lost their power. When Martha made snide comments about unseemly haste, Clara simply smiled and changed the subject. When old Bill Patterson gruffly congratulated her on landing a good man, she accepted the awkward sentiment with grace. She was changing, she realized. Not becoming someone else, but rediscovering parts of herself she'd buried under grief and survival. The woman who'd once dreamed of owning land, raising horses, building something bigger than just getting by, that woman was stirring back to life. 6 weeks into their courtship, Ethan invited her to spend a Sunday at the ranch. Clara accepted, though the intimacy of a full day together made her nervous. Ethan picked her up at dawn in a wagon, the autumn morning crisp and bright. The ranch looked different than it had on her first visit. Ethan had accomplished remarkable work in the months since taking ownership. The barn roof repaired, fences mended, fields cleared, and ready for spring planting. The ranch house itself was still rough, but habitable, with new windows and a solid front porch. It's starting to look like a real homestead, Clara said as they pulled up. Still a long way to go, Ethan replied, but she could hear the pride in his voice. Come on, I'll show you what I've been working on. He gave her a tour of the property, pointing out plans for expansion, discussing his vision for the operation. Clara listened with genuine interest, offering opinions when he asked, and asking intelligent questions that made him look at her with that expression she was learning to recognize, the one that said he saw her, valued her input, wanted her thoughts. They stopped at the corral where 3 horses grazed peacefully. I'm starting small with the herd, Ethan explained, just enough to breed quality stock without overextending. Eventually I'd like to expand, but for now, it's smart, Clara interrupted. Too many ranchers try to grow too fast and end up losing everything when a hard winter hits or prices drop. Building gradually means you can weather setbacks. Ethan smiled. Exactly. Most people don't understand that kind of patience. Most people haven't almost lost everything, Clara said. When you've been that close to the edge, you learn to value steady progress over quick gains. They walked to a rise overlooking the main pasture, and Ethan spread a blanket he'd brought from the wagon. They sat together in companionable silence, watching clouds drift across the endless Montana sky. Can I ask you something? Clara said after a while. About Sarah? Ethan tensed slightly but nodded. Of course. Do you still love her? It was a bold question, maybe too bold, but Clara needed to know. She'd been the widow who couldn't let go for so long. She understood that grief didn't have an expiration date. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. I'll always love her, he said finally. She was my wife, the mother of my child, even though neither of them survived. That doesn't just disappear. I know, Clara said softly. But loving her doesn't mean I can't move forward, Ethan continued. For a long time I thought it did. Thought that letting myself care about someone else would somehow betray her memory. But that's not living, Clara. That's just existing with ghosts. When did you realize that? When I met you. He turned to face her fully. When I saw someone else trapped in the same cage I'd built for myself, and I wanted to help you break free. Took me a while to realize I was really trying to free us both. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. I still love Thomas too. Some days more than others, some days I'm angry at him for dying and leaving me with such a mess. Is that terrible? It's human, Ethan said gently. Grief isn't simple or neat. It's messy and contradictory, and it doesn't follow rules. I used to feel guilty, Clara admitted, for being angry, for resenting him sometimes, like I wasn't allowed to have complicated feelings about someone who died. You're allowed to feel whatever you feel. Ethan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she didn't, he cupped her face with one calloused hand. You don't have to choose between honoring the past and living in the present. They can coexist. The simple permission in those words cracked something loose in Clara's chest. She'd been carrying so much guilt for surviving when Thomas didn't, for struggling to keep his business afloat, for wanting things he could no longer give her, and now for caring about another man. But Ethan understood. He carried the same burdens, the same complicated grief. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For understanding, for being patient, for not running when I was difficult. Ethan smiled. You weren't difficult. You were scared. There's a difference. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. Clara, I need you to know something. I'm not here to fix you or save you or complete you. You're already whole, but I'd like to be part of your life, if you'll let me, as a partner, not a savior. The distinction mattered more than he probably knew. Clara had been treated like a broken thing for so long, by well-meaning friends, by pitying customers, by herself. But Ethan saw her differently. He saw strength, capability, worth. I'd like that too, she said, her voice barely audible. They sat together on that hilltop for hours, talking and laughing and simply being. Ethan told her stories about his grandfather who'd taught him woodworking, about the Wyoming homestead where he'd grown up, about dreams he'd had before loss redefined his world. Clara shared memories of her childhood in Missouri, her parents who'd died of fever when she was 19, the journey west with Thomas full of hope and naive optimism. By the time the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, something fundamental had shifted between them. The courtship that had begun tentatively, carefully, had deepened into genuine partnership. They knew each other's wounds now, had seen each other's scars and not flinched away. As Ethan drove her back to town in the gathering dusk, Clara felt a contentment she hadn't experienced in years. Not the giddy excitement of new love, she was too old and too weathered for that, but something steadier. Hope. The quiet belief that maybe, just maybe, she deserved good things. Same time next Sunday? Ethan asked as he helped her down from the wagon at the Mercantile's back entrance. I'd like that. He took her hand, raised it to his lips in an old-fashioned gesture that should have felt ridiculous but instead felt exactly right. Good night, Clara. Good night, Ethan. She watched him drive away, then let herself into her small living quarters, feeling lighter than air. The wooden box with carved wildflowers sat on her bedside table, and she ran her fingers over it fondly before preparing for bed. That night, for the first time since Thomas's death, Clara fell asleep without the weight of grief pressing on her chest. In its place was something new, fragile, but growing stronger, the possibility of happiness. The following weeks blurred together in a pleasant rhythm. Ethan's visits became the highlights Clara measured her days against. They fell into comfortable patterns. Thursday suppers, Sunday visits to the ranch, stolen moments during his supply runs when the Mercantile was quiet. Each interaction added another layer to their connection, building something solid and real. Red Hollow gradually accepted them as a couple. Even Martha Hutchins seemed to tire of disapproving when it became clear neither Clara nor Ethan cared about her opinion. The town moved on to fresher gossip, and Clara found she didn't miss being the center of attention. But comfort brought its own challenges. As Clara grew more secure in their courtship, old fears began whispering again. What if this happiness was temporary? What if she let herself fully invest only to lose everything again? What if Ethan woke up one day and realized he'd chosen wrong? The doubts accumulated like snow, silent and steady, until one evening in early December when they finally broke through. Ethan had just asked if she'd like to attend the town's Christmas social with him, a public declaration that would signal serious intent to everyone in Red Hollow. Clara felt panic claw up her throat. "I don't think that's a good idea," she said too quickly. Ethan paused, his hand on the mercantile door. "Why not?" It's so public. Everyone will be watching, making assumptions." "We've been courting for 3 months, Clara. People are already making assumptions." "But attending the social together, that's different. She couldn't finish. "That's what?" Ethan's voice was gentle but firm. "That's admitting we're serious about each other?" "Because I thought we were." Clara wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the wood stove burning nearby. "What if we're moving too fast?" "Are we? Or are you getting scared again?" The accuracy of his observation stung. "Maybe both." Ethan closed the door and crossed back to her. "Talk to me. What's really going on?" Clara struggled to put her fears into words. "Everything's been so good lately. Too good. And I keep waiting for something to go wrong because that's what always happens. Good things don't last. Happiness gets taken away. And if I let myself believe this is real, if I commit fully and then lose it, you'll survive," Ethan said quietly, "just like you survived before." "I barely survived before." The confession burst out, raw and desperate. "It nearly destroyed me, Ethan. For months after Thomas died, I only kept going because stopping would have meant admitting defeat. I was hanging on by my fingernails, and some days I wasn't sure I wanted to keep hanging on at all." Ethan's face reflected understanding and pain. "I know that feeling. The months after Sarah died, there were days I'd go through all the motions, eat, work, sleep, but inside I was hollow, just a shell going through familiar patterns because I didn't know what else to do. So you understand why I'm scared?" "I do." He took her hands carefully. "But Clara, you can't let fear of loss prevent you from living. That's not protecting yourself. That's just a slower way of dying." The words landed like physical blows. Clara pulled away, wrapping her arms tight around her middle. "You're asking me to risk everything." "No," Ethan said. "I'm asking you to risk something. There's a difference. You don't have to bet your entire existence on us working out. But you do have to actually try, not just go through motions while keeping one foot out the door." "I'm trying." "Are you?" His voice was still gentle, but there was steel underneath. "Or are you just waiting for an excuse to run again?" The accusation hurt because it contained truth. Clara had been growing more comfortable, yes, but she'd also been maintaining careful distance. Never letting herself need Ethan too much, never planning too far ahead, never quite believing this would last. "I don't want to run," she whispered. "Then don't." Ethan moved closer, his presence solid and reassuring. "Come to the social with me. Hold my hand in front of the whole town. Let people see that you've chosen me and I've chosen you. Take the risk." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. The social was weeks away still. Time to prepare, to adjust, to maybe find courage, or time to build more walls. "I'll think about it," she said finally. Disappointment flickered across Ethan's face, but he nodded. "All right, think about it." He retrieved his hat from the counter. "I should get back to the ranch before full dark." "Ethan," he paused at the door, looking back at her with those storm-gray eyes that saw too much. "I'm sorry," Clara said. "I'm sorry I keep doing this, pulling close and then pushing away." "I know you're scared," Ethan said quietly. "I'm scared too, Clara. Every time I ride away from you, I'm terrified something will happen before I see you again. Every time I let myself care more, I risk that pain all over again. But I'm doing it anyway because the alternative, living safe but alone, that's not really living at all." He left before she could respond, and Clara stood in the empty mercantile feeling like she'd failed some crucial test. She wanted to run after him, to say yes to the social and everything it represented. But fear held her frozen in place, whispering that safety was smarter than risk. That night, Clara lay awake staring at the ceiling, Ethan's words echoing in her mind. Was she really trying, or just pretending, while keeping her heart protected? And if she kept protecting herself so carefully, what was she actually protecting? Just the shell of the person she used to be? The wooden box sat on her bedside table, carved flowers catching moonlight. Ethan had made that for her before he'd even known if she'd accept his courtship. He'd risked rejection, risked looking foolish, risked caring about someone who might never care back. And here she was, months into their relationship, still unable to commit to something as simple as attending a social together. Clara rose from bed and lit a lamp with shaking hands. She couldn't keep doing this, couldn't keep living in this liminal space between grief and hope, between past and future. Eventually, she'd have to choose, stay frozen in safety or risk the terrifying possibility of joy. The question was which choice would destroy her faster. If you or someone you know is having a difficult time, free support is available. Find resources. Morning came too soon, bringing with it a headache from too little sleep and too many circular thoughts. Clara moved through her opening routine mechanically, unlocking the mercantile doors and preparing for another day of serving customers while her mind remained trapped in last night's conversation. She'd heard him. The look on Ethan's face when she'd said she needed to think about the social, that flicker of disappointment he'd tried to hide, haunted her. He'd been patient for months, giving her space and time and understanding, and she'd repaid him with more hesitation, more walls, more fear. The morning passed slowly. Clara helped old Mrs. Patterson find thread that matched her mending, listened to Bill complain about the early snow threatening his cattle, restocked shelves that didn't really need restocking. Anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from spiraling. Mary appeared just before noon, her arms full of folded laundry she was delivering to the boarding house. One look at Clara's face and she detoured into the mercantile. "What happened?" Mary asked without preamble. Clara considered deflecting, then gave up. "Ethan asked me to the Christmas social. I panicked." Mary set down her laundry basket with a sigh. "Of course you did." "He thinks I'm keeping one foot out the door, that I'm not really trying. Are you?" The question stung because Clara had asked herself the same thing all night. "I don't know anymore. I thought I was trying, but maybe he's right. Maybe I'm just going through the motions while waiting for everything to fall apart." Mary moved around the counter and took Clara's hands, forcing her friend to meet her eyes. "Listen to me. You've been through hell. You earned the right to be cautious. But Clara, there's a difference between being cautious and being a coward." "I'm not—" "Yes, you are," Mary interrupted gently. "And I say that with love. You're so terrified of losing again that you won't let yourself fully have anything. But that's not protection, honey. That's just a different kind of loss." Clara pulled her hands away, hugging herself. "You don't understand. When Thomas died, I wanted to die too. For months I woke up disappointed to still be breathing. The only thing that kept me going was spite, refusing to let his creditors win, refusing to admit defeat. I clawed my way back from that edge, Mary. I can't go there again." "So you'd rather live half a life? Never fully committing, never fully feeling, just existing in this safe little bubble you've built?" "At least I'm existing," Clara shot back. "At least I'm still standing." "But for what?" Mary's voice was urgent now. "What's the point of standing if you're too afraid to actually walk anywhere?" Before Clara could respond, the bell chimed. Both women turned to see Ethan in the doorway, surprise crossing his face at finding them in what was clearly an intense conversation. "I'm sorry," he said immediately. "I didn't mean to interrupt. I can come back." "No," Clara said quickly. Then more gently, "No, it's fine. Mary was just leaving." Mary gave Clara a long look that promised this conversation wasn't over, then gathered her laundry and headed for the door. She paused beside Ethan long enough to murmur something Clara couldn't hear, then disappeared into the street. Awkward silence filled the mercantile. Ethan stood near the door, hat in hand, looking uncertain, an expression Clara hated seeing on his normally confident face. "I didn't come to pressure you," he said finally, "about the social. I was out of line last night, pushing like that." "You weren't out of line," Clara replied. "You were honest. That's different." "Maybe, but I should have been more patient." "Ethan, you've been nothing but patient for 3 months. The problem isn't you." Clara took a breath, forcing herself to be as honest as he'd been. "The problem is me. I'm so afraid of losing what we have that I can't let myself fully have it. And I know that doesn't make sense." "It makes perfect sense," Ethan said quietly. He moved closer, setting his hat on the counter. "You think I don't do the same thing? Every time I start feeling too happy, too content, part of me braces for disaster, waiting for the universe to take it away like it took Sarah and the baby. Then how do you move past it? How do you let yourself risk it anyway? I don't know if you ever move completely past it, Ethan admitted, but I decided that living in fear of loss was its own kind of death. Slower, maybe. More subtle, but just as final. He reached out, his hand open in invitation. Clara, I can't promise you forever. I can't promise nothing bad will ever happen, but I can promise that right now, in this moment, I choose you. Every day I choose you, and I'll keep choosing you until you either believe it or tell me to stop. Clara felt tears building, her chest tight with emotion. What if I can't do this? What if I'm too broken? You're not broken, Ethan said firmly. You're wounded. There's a difference. Wounds heal, Clara, if you let them. She thought about that, about the distinction between broken and wounded. Something broken couldn't function, couldn't be repaired, but something wounded could heal, could recover, could become whole again even if the scars remained. The social is in 2 weeks, Clara said slowly. That's not much time. It's enough time to decide if you trust me, if you trust us. And if I say no? If I can't do it? Ethan's jaw tightened, pain flickering across his features. Then I'll know where we stand, and I'll have to decide if I can keep courting someone who won't let me really court them. The honesty was brutal and necessary. He wasn't issuing an ultimatum exactly, but he was setting a boundary. He deserved someone willing to try, willing to risk, willing to meet him halfway. Clara couldn't expect him to wait indefinitely while she hid behind fear. I'll give you an answer before the week's out, Clara said. I promise. That's all I ask. Ethan picked up his hat, then hesitated. Clara, whatever you decide, I want you to know these past 3 months have been the happiest I've been since Sarah died. Even with the uncertainty, even with the complications. You brought light back into my life. I need you to know that, regardless of what happens next. He left before she could respond, and Clara stood frozen in place, his words echoing in the sudden silence. She'd brought light into his life. When was the last time someone had said anything like that to her? When was the last time she'd believed she had light to offer anyone? The rest of the day crawled by in a haze. Clara served customers automatically, her mind miles away, replaying conversations and examining fears from every angle. By closing time, she was exhausted and no closer to a decision. That night, she sat in her small living quarters with a cup of tea growing cold in her hands. The wooden box sat on the table before her, and Clara found herself opening it for the first time since Ethan had given it to her. Inside were a few small treasures: a pressed flower from one of Ethan's bouquets, a smooth river stone he'd found and thought she'd like, a folded piece of paper with a recipe for Mrs. Henderson's biscuits he'd copied out for her. Small things, simple things, but each one represented a moment of thoughtfulness, a gesture of care, evidence that someone saw her and valued her and wanted to make her smile. Clara picked up the river stone, running her thumb over its smooth surface. Ethan had presented it awkwardly, saying it reminded him of her, weathered smooth by time and hardship, but beautiful because of it, not despite it. She'd laughed at the comparison, but the stone had gone into the box, treasured. What was she so afraid of? She'd already let Ethan in, already cared about him, already given him the power to hurt her. Refusing to attend a social wouldn't protect her heart. That ship had sailed months ago. All it would do was push away someone who genuinely cared for her while she pretended safety in isolation. The realization settled over Clara like a weight. She was already invested, already at risk. The only question was whether she'd acknowledge it or keep pretending she could control the outcome through careful distance. She thought about Thomas, about the life they'd built and lost. He'd been a good man, a kind man, but their relationship had been young love, passionate and hopeful but untested by real hardship until the very end. What she had with Ethan was different. They'd both been broken by loss and put themselves back together. They knew exactly what they were risking, and that made their choice more deliberate, more mature. Thomas would want her to be happy. She knew that, had known it for years even when she couldn't let herself believe it. He wouldn't want her frozen in grief, locked in the past, refusing joy out of some misguided loyalty to his memory. Clara set down the stone and picked up the pressed flower, an Indian paintbrush, the sunset red petals now faded but still beautiful. She remembered the day Ethan had brought her that first bouquet, how shocked she'd been that he'd remembered such a small detail. That was who he was, someone who listened, who noticed, who showed up consistently, and asked for nothing but the chance to try. She'd been making him prove himself for 3 months while she stood back and judged whether he was worth the risk. How was that fair? How was that a partnership? Mary's words from earlier came back to her. There's a difference between being cautious and being a coward. Clara had been calling her fear caution, self-protection, wisdom learned from hard experience. But maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe she was just scared and all her justifications were just pretty names for running away. The question wasn't whether attending the social was risky. Everything was risky. The question was whether she trusted Ethan enough to risk it with him. Clara closed the box gently and stood, moving to her window. Outside, Red Hollow was settling into its evening rhythms. Lamps lighting in windows, smoke rising from chimneys, the distant sound of piano music from the Lucky Strike. Normal life, continuing whether she participated or not. She could keep hiding here, safe and alone, managing her small existence until the years blurred together and she woke up old and bitter, wondering what might have been. Or she could step out into uncertainty with someone who'd proven himself worthy of trust. The choice, Clara realized, had already been made. She'd made it the day she rode out to Ethan's ranch. Everything since had just been her fighting the inevitable, trying to maintain control over something that couldn't be controlled. Love was risk. Always had been. Always would be. The only real choice was whether to embrace it or run from it. Clara pressed her forehead against the cold window glass, letting the decision settle into her bones. She knew what she had to do. The question was whether she had the courage to actually do it. The next morning, Clara woke with purpose. She dressed carefully, ate breakfast without tasting it, and opened the mercantile at her usual time. But instead of diving into work, she stood at the counter and waited, knowing Ethan's pattern well enough to predict when he'd appear. He arrived mid-morning, his expression carefully neutral as he entered. "Morning, Clara." "Morning." She took a breath, steadying herself. "Do you have time to talk? I can close for a few minutes." Wariness flickered across his face, but he nodded. Clara locked the front door and flipped the sign to closed, her heart hammering. They stood facing each other across the counter, the familiar space suddenly feeling charged with possibility. "I've been thinking," Clara began, "about what you said, about me keeping one foot out the door." "Clara, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do." She held up a hand, stopping him. "You were right. I've been so focused on protecting myself that I haven't really been trying. I've been going through the motions of courtship while secretly waiting for you to prove you'd leave like everyone else. That's not fair to you. It's not fair to either of us." Ethan's expression softened. "I understand why—" "I want to go to the social with you," Clara interrupted, the words tumbling out before she could lose her nerve. "I want to walk in there with you, let the whole town see us together, and stop pretending this isn't real and important and terrifying. I want to try. Really try, not just half-heartedly while keeping escape routes planned." She saw hope bloom across Ethan's face, bright and undeniable. "You mean it?" "I'm scared out of my mind," Clara admitted. "But yes, I mean it. I'm tired of being scared. I'm tired of protecting myself right into loneliness. You asked me to trust you, trust us, so I'm choosing to trust, even though it terrifies me." Ethan moved around the counter so fast she barely had time to register before he was pulling her into his arms. Clara stiffened for just a second, physical affection still unfamiliar after years of isolation, then melted into his embrace, letting herself be held. "Thank you," Ethan murmured into her hair. "Thank you for being brave enough to try." "I'm not brave," Clara said against his chest. "I'm terrified. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing it anyway." He pulled back enough to look at her face, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Clara, I know I can't promise you forever, but I can promise today, and tomorrow, and the day after that. As many todays as you'll give me." Clara felt tears slip down her cheeks. Not sad tears, but the kind that came from emotion too big to contain. "That's enough," she whispered. "Today is enough." They stood there in the quiet mercantile, holding each other while dust motes danced in the morning sunlight streaming through the windows. Outside, Red Hollow continued its daily business, but inside this moment felt suspended, precious, real. Finally, Ethan released her reluctantly. "I should let you get back to work. Or you could stay," Clara heard herself say. "Keep me company for a bit. I could use your opinion on some inventory decisions." His smile was like sunrise. "I'd like that." They spent the next hour working side by side, Ethan helping reorganize a stubborn shelf unit while Clara updated her ledgers. It was mundane, domestic, utterly ordinary, and somehow that made it perfect. This was what partnership looked like. Not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but showing up and sharing space and making the everyday tasks easier through companionship. By the time Ethan left to return to his ranch, Clara felt lighter than she had in weeks. The fear hadn't disappeared. She suspected it never would entirely, but it no longer controlled her. She'd made a choice to move forward, and that choice felt right in a way nothing had for years. Mary stopped by that afternoon and immediately noticed the change. "Something's different. You look settled." "I told Ethan I'd go to the social with him," Clara said. "Really go, not just show up and spend the whole time panicking." Mary's face lit up. "Clara, I'm so proud of you. Don't be too proud yet. I might still panic. But you're trying. That's what matters." Mary squeezed her hand. "This is good. You deserve good things, honey. You deserve to be happy." The words settled warm in Clara's chest. She'd spent so long believing happiness wasn't meant for her, that she'd had her chance with Thomas and lost it, that the rest of her life was just aftermath. But maybe that wasn't true. Maybe she could have more than one chance, more than one shot at building something meaningful. The 2 weeks before the Christmas social passed in a blur of preparation and growing anticipation. The whole town buzzed with excitement about the annual event, the biggest social gathering of the winter season, when ranchers and townsfolk alike came together to celebrate before the hardest months ahead. Clara found herself caught up in the preparations despite her lingering nervousness. Mary helped her choose fabric for a new dress, and together they sewed it over several evenings. A deep blue wool that brought out her eyes, with careful detail work around the collar and cuffs. "You're going to be the most beautiful woman there," Mary declared, pinning the hem. "That's not saying much considering the competition is mostly ranchers' wives in their Sunday best," Clara replied, but she couldn't help smiling. "Ethan won't be able to take his eyes off you." The thought made Clara's stomach flip nervously. This would be their first truly public appearance as a couple at a major town event. Everyone would be watching, judging, speculating. The attention made her want to hide, but she'd made a promise to try, and that meant showing up even when it was uncomfortable. Ethan came to town twice in the week before the social, both times finding excuses to spend time with Clara. They were growing more comfortable with each other, the conversations flowing easier, the silences between words companionable rather than awkward. Clara found herself sharing things she'd never told anyone, small fears, old dreams. The person she'd been before loss had redefined her. "I used to want to teach," she admitted one afternoon while they sorted inventory together. "Before I married Thomas, I had this idea that I'd run a school somewhere, teach children to read and write and think for themselves." "Why didn't you?" Ethan asked. "Life got in the way. Thomas needed help with the mercantile. Then we were always planning to start a family." She stopped, the old pain surfacing. "That never happened, obviously. And then he got sick, and everything else became irrelevant." Ethan was quiet for a moment, his hands stilling on the box he'd been unpacking. "Do you still want to teach?" Clara considered the question seriously. "I don't know. It's been so long since I let myself want anything beyond just surviving. But sometimes I see children in here struggling to read labels or count change, and I think—" She shrugged, uncomfortable with the admission. "I think I could help with that. If I had time. If it made sense." "You should do it," Ethan said firmly. "Start small. Maybe offer to help a few kids after shop hours. See if you like it." "I couldn't possibly. The mercantile takes all my time." "The mercantile takes all your time because you let it," Ethan interrupted gently. "Because it's safe to pour yourself into work instead of pursuing things that matter to you. But Clara, you're allowed to want things. You're allowed to build a life that's bigger than just getting by." The words hit hard because they were true. Clara had hidden behind the mercantile's demands for years, telling herself she had no choice, no time, no resources for anything else. But that was just another wall, another way of staying small and safe. "I'll think about it," she said quietly. "You do a lot of thinking," Ethan observed with a slight smile. "Maybe it's time to start doing instead." She wanted to argue, but couldn't. He was right. How many opportunities had she thought about, considered, then ultimately dismissed because taking action meant risking failure. The evening of the social arrived with unseasonable warmth, the December night clear and almost gentle. Clara dressed in her new blue gown with trembling hands, her stomach twisted in knots. She'd committed to this, but that didn't make it less terrifying. Mary appeared to help with her hair, pinning it up in a style more elaborate than Clara's usual simple bun. "You look beautiful," Mary said softly. "Ethan's a lucky man." "I'm the lucky one," Clara replied. "He could have chosen anyone. Why he wants a broken-down widow with more baggage than the stagecoach—" "Stop," Mary commanded. "You're not broken down. You're weathered, which is different. You're strong and capable, and you've survived hell. That's attractive, Clara. That's worth wanting." Before Clara could respond, a knock sounded at her back door. Her heart leaped into her throat. Ethan, right on time. She opened the door to find him cleaned up and formal in dark trousers and a pressed white shirt, his hair still damp from recent washing. But it was the look on his face when he saw her that stole Clara's breath. Pure wonder, like he'd forgotten she existed and was seeing her for the first time. "You're beautiful," he said, his voice rough. "You clean up pretty well yourself," Clara managed. Mary shooed them both out with promises to lock up the mercantile, and suddenly Clara was walking through Red Hollow's main street on Ethan's arm, heading toward the community hall where music and laughter already spilled into the night. Every step felt momentous. Clara was hyper-aware of curious eyes tracking their progress, of whispered conversations pausing as they passed, of the weight of public scrutiny. But Ethan walked steady and sure beside her, his arm solid under her hand, radiating quiet confidence. "Breathe," he murmured. "Just breathe. We're just two people going to a party." "Two people the whole town is watching," Clara muttered back. "Let them watch. We're not doing anything wrong." They reached the community hall's entrance, and Clara hesitated. Once they walked through that door together, there was no taking it back. Everyone would know. Everyone would see. The widow and the widower, daring to seek happiness despite their losses. "Last chance to run," Ethan said softly, but there was no judgment in his voice, just understanding. He'd give her the out if she needed it. Clara looked up at him, at this man who'd shown such patience with her fears, such respect for her boundaries, such genuine care for her well-being. He deserved better than someone who kept running. He deserved a partner who could stand beside him without flinching. "I'm not running," Clara said, and meant it. "Let's go in." His answering smile was worth every moment of fear. Together, they stepped through the doorway and into the crowded, warm chaos of Red Hollow's Christmas social. The community hall had been transformed. Garlands of evergreen draped the walls, candles flickered on every surface, and a small band occupied the far corner playing lively tunes. People clustered in groups, talking and laughing, and the long tables against one wall groaned under potluck contributions. Conversation didn't exactly stop when Clara and Ethan entered, but it definitely quieted. Heads turned, eyes assessed, and Clara felt the weight of collective attention like a physical thing. Then Mrs. Henderson appeared, beaming. "Mr. Calloway, Mrs. Whitmore, I'm so glad you came. Clara, you look absolutely lovely. That color suits you beautifully." The genuine warmth in her voice broke the tension. Other voices joined in, greetings, compliments, normal social interactions that gradually eased the awkwardness. People were curious, yes, but most seemed genuinely happy to see them together. Even Martha Hutchins, holding court near the punch bowl, merely sniffed disapprovingly but said nothing outright critical. Clara counted that as a victory. "See," Ethan murmured, "not so terrible." "The night's still young," Clara replied, but she was smiling. They made their way through the crowd, accepting congratulations and deflecting nosy questions with practiced ease. Ethan never left her side, his presence a steady anchor in the social chaos. When someone commented on how quickly their courtship had progressed, he simply replied that when you knew, and refused to elaborate despite obvious fishing for details. Clara found herself relaxing incrementally. This wasn't as bad as she'd feared. Yes, people were watching, but most seemed genuinely pleased rather than judgmental. Red Hollow had seen its share of tragedy and hardship. Most folks understood that happiness, when found, should be celebrated rather than criticized. The band struck up a waltz and couples began moving toward the cleared space serving as a dance floor. Ethan turned to Clara with raised eyebrows. "Dance with me?" Panic fluttered in her chest. I haven't danced in years, since before Thomas died. I've probably forgotten how. I doubt that. And even if you step on my feet, I won't mind. He held out his hand, patient and hopeful. Clara stared at that offered hand, seeing everything it represented. This was it, the final public declaration. Dancing together in front of the whole town, claiming each other openly. No more hiding, no more pretending this was casual or temporary. She thought about all the reasons to refuse, all the ways this could go wrong, all the pain that might be waiting down this road. Then she thought about Ethan's words from weeks ago. You can't let fear of loss prevent you from living. That's not protecting yourself. That's just a slower way of dying. Clara placed her hand in Ethan's. Don't say I didn't warn you when you have bruised toes tomorrow. His grin was brilliant as he led her onto the dance floor. The music swelled around them, and Ethan drew her into the waltz position, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers, proper and respectful even as they moved together. Clara had been right. She'd forgotten how to dance. For the first few turns, she was stiff and awkward, too conscious of her feet and the watching eyes. But Ethan was patient, guiding her gently, and gradually muscle memory took over. Her body remembered the rhythm, even if her mind had forgotten. They swept across the floor with growing confidence, and Clara felt something shift inside her chest. This was what it felt like to partner with someone, to move in rhythm, to trust another person to lead while you followed, to create something together that neither could achieve alone. You're beautiful when you smile, Ethan said softly, his eyes warm. I'm dancing for the first time in 5 years at a public event with the whole town watching, Clara replied. If I can smile through this, I can smile through anything. Does that mean you're not terrified anymore? Oh, I'm still terrified, Clara admitted. But I'm doing it anyway. That has to count for something. It counts for everything. They danced 2 more songs, and by the third, Clara had stopped thinking about watching eyes and critical whispers. She was simply present in the moment, in the music, the movement, the warmth of Ethan's hand at her waist. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she wasn't planning escape routes or bracing for disaster. She was just living. When the music finally paused for the band to rest, Ethan led her off the floor. They found seats along the wall, and Mary appeared with cups of punch and a knowing smile. You two look lovely out there, Mary said, like you've been dancing together for years. Clara only stepped on my feet 3 times, Ethan said with mock solemnity. 4, Clara corrected, but who's counting? They laughed together, easy and comfortable, and Clara felt a surge of affection for both of them. Mary, who'd pushed her toward this risk, and Ethan, who'd made the risk worth taking. The evening continued in a warm blur of music and conversation and gradual acceptance. People approached throughout the night to chat, and Clara found herself participating in social interactions she'd avoided for years. She talked about the mercantile's inventory with ranchers' wives planning spring purchases. She discussed weather patterns with farmers worried about the growing season. She even fielded questions about her relationship with Ethan, answering with more honesty than she'd ever have managed before. We're taking things one day at a time, she told Mrs. Patterson when the older woman asked about their intentions, seeing where it leads. Smart approach, Mrs. Patterson approved. You've both known loss. No point rushing when you're building something meant to last. Building something meant to last. The phrase resonated with Clara. That was exactly what they were doing, not rushing into thoughtless passion, but carefully constructing a foundation strong enough to support a real future. As midnight approached and families began bundling up children to head home, Ethan drew Clara aside to a quieter corner. Thank you for tonight, he said quietly. For coming, for dancing, for trying. I know how hard this was for you. It was hard, Clara agreed. But it was also good, really good. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be part of things, instead of just watching from the sidelines. You don't have to watch from the sidelines anymore. You can participate. Build a life that's full instead of just safe. Clara looked around the thinning crowd, at neighbors and friends, at Mary laughing with Mrs. Henderson, at the decorations and music and warmth of community. This was what she'd been missing. Not just romantic connection, but belonging, purpose, the sense that she mattered to people beyond her role as a shopkeeper. I think I'd like that, she said softly. Building a full life. I'm not sure I remember how, but I'd like to learn. Ethan's smile was gentle. We'll figure it out together. One day at a time, remember? One day at a time, Clara echoed. As they prepared to leave, gathering wraps and saying goodbyes, Clara caught sight of herself in the hall's mirror. She barely recognized the woman looking back, flushed and smiling, eyes bright with something that looked dangerously like happiness. When had she last looked this alive? The walk back to the mercantile happened in comfortable silence, their hands linked, the night cold but clear. When they reached her door, Ethan paused. "Clara, I need to ask you something." The seriousness in his tone made her pulse quicken. "All right, tonight proved we can do this, be together publicly, build something real, but I need to know if you're truly committed to trying or if you're still keeping exit strategies planned in case things get hard." Clara took a breath, understanding what he was really asking. Was she all in or still hedging her bets? "I'm committed," she said firmly, "not just to showing up, but to actually building something with you. It terrifies me, but I'm choosing it anyway. Choosing you, choosing us." Relief and joy flooded Ethan's expression. He raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "Then I have one more question. May I court you properly? Not just these careful visits and cautious conversations, but really court you with the intention of building a future together?" Clara's heart hammered so hard she was certain he could hear it. This was the moment, the real commitment, the choice that would change everything. She thought about all her fears, all her careful walls, all the protection she'd built around her damaged heart. Then she thought about the alternative, returning to her small, safe existence, watching life happen around her while she remained frozen in grief. "Yes," Clara whispered, "court me properly. Build a future with me. I'm ready to try." Ethan pulled her into his arms, and Clara went willingly, letting herself be held without reservation for the first time. When he finally released her, his eyes were bright with emotion. "One day at a time," he reminded her gently. "One day at a time," Clara agreed, "starting tomorrow." After he left, Clara stood in her quiet living quarters, still wearing her blue dress, her cheeks aching from smiling. The wooden box sat on her table, and she added a new treasure, the ribbon from her hair, which Ethan had gently removed during their last waltz. Small things, simple gestures, but together they added up to something bigger than the sum of their parts. A life being rebuilt, a heart learning to trust again, a future taking shape one careful day at a time. For the first time since Thomas's death, Clara went to sleep without the crushing weight of grief on her chest. In its place was something new, fragile but growing stronger. Hope. Real hope that tomorrow might bring joy instead of just survival. And in the morning, when she woke to fresh snow falling softly outside her window, Clara found herself actually looking forward to what the day might bring. Because for the first time in 5 years, she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. The snow that had begun falling during the night continued through the next day, blanketing Red Hollow in pristine white that softened the harsh edges of frontier life. Clara stood at her mercantile window, watching it accumulate, a cup of coffee warming her hands, and for once the winter didn't fill her with dread about difficult months ahead. Instead, she found herself thinking about how beautiful it looked, how peaceful. The bell chimed earlier than usual. Clara turned to find Ethan stamping snow from his boots, his cheeks reddened from cold but his expression warm. "You rode through this?" Clara asked, gesturing to the still falling snow outside. "Couldn't wait until Thursday," Ethan admitted. "Wanted to see you. Make sure last night was real and not something I dreamed." The confession made Clara's heart skip. Even now, after everything, his directness caught her off guard. "It was real," she said softly. "I'm still terrified, but it was real." Good terrified or bad terrified? Clara considered the question seriously. Good terrified, I think, like standing at the edge of something big and knowing you're about to jump, but wanting to jump anyway. Ethan crossed to the counter, brushing snow from his coat. "I brought you something. It's in my saddlebag. Let me get it." He ducked back outside and returned moments later carrying a wrapped bundle. When Clara opened it, she found a journal bound in soft leather, its pages blank and waiting. "You mentioned once that you used to write," Ethan said. "Your thoughts, observations, stories you'd tell yourself. You said Thomas's illness made you stop and you never started again." Clara ran her fingers over the smooth leather, surprised he'd remembered such a small detail from a conversation weeks ago. "I haven't written in years. I wouldn't even know what to say anymore. Then write nothing, or write everything. Write about the mercantile, or the weather, or how annoying Martha Hutchins is. He smiled. Or write about us. About this thing we're building. Sometimes putting words on paper helps make sense of feelings too big to hold inside. The gift was so thoughtful, so perfectly suited to who she'd been and who she might become again, that Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you. It's perfect. I want you to have space for yourself, Ethan said quietly. Not just space in your day, but space in your head. Room to think and dream and want things beyond just survival. Clara set the journal carefully on the counter. You keep doing that, pushing me to want more, be more. Why? Because you deserve more, Ethan said simply. And because I've spent 4 years settling for less than I deserved. And I recognize the pattern when I see it in someone else. We both got used to making ourselves small, Clara. Maybe it's time we took up the space we're entitled to. Before Clara could respond, the door opened again, and Mary bustled in, shaking snow from her shawl. She stopped short when she saw Ethan, a knowing smile spreading across her face. Mr. Calloway, I didn't expect to see you in town today, given the weather. Couldn't stay away, Ethan replied easily. Besides, I promised Clara I'd help reorganize her back storage room. Those shelves have been troubling her for weeks. It was a convenient excuse, but Mary's expression suggested she wasn't fooled. How generous of you. I'll just collect those mending supplies I ordered and leave you to your work. After Mary departed with barely suppressed amusement, Clara shook her head. She's going to tell everyone you rode through a snowstorm just to see me. Good, Ethan said. Let her tell. I'm not ashamed of wanting to spend time with you. They worked together through the morning, and Clara was struck again by how natural it felt. This partnership, this easy companionship. Ethan didn't try to take over or tell her how things should be organized. Instead, he asked questions, listened to her reasoning, and offered suggestions she was free to accept or reject. It was collaborative in a way Thomas had never quite managed, bless him. Thomas had meant well, but he'd often assumed he knew best, making decisions without consultation. Ethan was different. He treated her like an equal partner whose opinions mattered. By midday, they'd made significant progress on the storage room. They took a break, sharing bread and cheese Clara had brought from her quarters, sitting on upturned crates while snow continued to fall outside. I've been thinking about what you said, Clara began, about teaching, helping children learn to read. Ethan's attention sharpened. And maybe I could try it. Start small, like you suggested. There's a boy who comes in sometimes, Billy, the blacksmith's youngest son. He can barely read, and his father doesn't have time to teach him properly. I could offer to work with him, see if I'm any good at it. You'd be excellent at it, Ethan said with certainty. You're patient, clear in your explanations, and you genuinely care about helping people understand things. That's exactly what good teaching requires. Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. You have a lot of faith in me. I do. Maybe more than you have in yourself right now, but that's all right. I'll hold enough faith for both of us until yours catches up. The declaration should have felt overwhelming, but instead it felt like relief. For so long, Clara had carried everything alone, believing that asking for help or leaning on someone else meant weakness. But maybe strength wasn't about carrying burdens solo. Maybe it was about trusting others enough to share the weight. They spent the afternoon together, working and talking and simply existing in each other's presence. When the early winter darkness began falling, Ethan prepared to ride back to the ranch despite Clara's concerns about the snow. I've ridden through worse, he assured her, and I'll be back Thursday as usual. But Clara, he paused at the door, his expression serious. I want you to know something. I'm not going anywhere. Not when it snows, not when things get difficult, not when you panic and try to push me away again. I'm here for the long term. I need you to believe that. I'm trying to, Clara said honestly. Old habits are hard to break. I know, but we'll break them together, one day at a time. After he left, Clara stood alone in the mercantile, the journal he'd given her resting on the counter. She picked it up, running her fingers over the leather binding, then carried it to her living quarters. That evening, for the first time in 5 years, she opened a blank page and began to write. The words came haltingly at first, awkward and uncertain, but gradually they flowed faster, pouring out observations and feelings she'd kept locked away. She wrote about Thomas and the grief that still surfaced unexpectedly. She wrote about the years of survival, the loneliness, the walls she'd built. And she wrote about Ethan, about storm-gray eyes and patient hands, about carved wildflowers and journals that proved someone saw her clearly enough to know what she needed. When Clara finally set down her pen, hours had passed and her hand ached, but her chest felt lighter, as though transferring feelings to paper had created space for something new. The following week settled into a pattern that gradually felt less like courtship and more like partnership. Ethan came to town regularly, always finding time to spend with Clara beyond just conducting business. They had supper together at least twice a week, took walks when weather permitted, and talked about everything from childhood memories to dreams for the future. Clara found herself opening up in ways she'd never managed before. She told Ethan about her parents' deaths, about the desperate loneliness of being 19 and suddenly alone. She shared memories of Thomas that weren't all sad, the good times, the laughter, the hopes they'd had before illness stole their future. And she talked about her fears, the ones that still woke her at 3 a.m, wondering if this happiness was temporary, if loss was waiting around the corner. Ethan listened to all of it without judgment, sharing his own struggles in return. He told her about the day Sarah died, about holding his stillborn daughter and feeling his entire world collapse. He described the year of drifting afterward, moving from town to town, trying to outrun grief that followed him everywhere. And he confessed his own fears, that he wasn't good enough, strong enough, whole enough to build something lasting. "We're both damaged," Clara said one evening as they sat in her small living quarters, the mercantile closed for the night. "Maybe that's why this works. We understand each other's scars. Or maybe it works because we're choosing to heal together instead of staying broken alone," Ethan countered. He reached across the small table, his hand open in invitation. Clara placed her hand in his, no longer hesitating. "Scars don't make us less, Clara. They prove we survived. That's nothing to be ashamed of." True to her word, Clara had reached out to the blacksmith about tutoring his youngest son. Billy had started coming to the mercantile twice a week after school, and Clara worked with him on reading and basic arithmetic. The boy was bright but undisciplined, his attention wandering easily. Teaching him required patience and creativity, finding ways to make lessons engaging, using examples from his daily life to illustrate concepts. Clara discovered she loved it. Watching Billy's face light up when he successfully sounded out a difficult word or solved a math problem brought her more satisfaction than anything had in years. She found herself thinking about teaching even during her regular work, planning lessons, and considering which books might interest a restless 8-year-old boy. "You're good at this," Mary observed one afternoon, watching Clara work with Billy. "Really good. Have you thought about expanding? Taking on more students?" "I don't have time for more students," Clara protested. The mercantile runs itself most days," Mary interrupted. "You could hire someone part-time to help with the shop, use those hours for teaching instead. There are plenty of children in Red Hollow who could benefit from proper instruction." The idea planted itself in Clara's mind, taking root despite her automatic resistance. She mentioned it to Ethan during their next supper together, expecting him to point out the practical difficulties. Instead, his eyes lit up. "You should do it," he said immediately. "Start a small school. Red Hollow needs one anyway. The nearest proper school is 20 miles away, and most families can't spare children for that kind of travel." "It's not that simple," Clara argued. "I'd need space, materials, time." "The community hall sits empty most days," Ethan pointed out. "I'm sure the town council would let you use it for teaching. Materials you can order through the mercantile, books, slates, chalk, and time you'd make by delegating some of your shop work." He leaned forward, his expression intense. "Clara, this is exactly what I meant about building a full life instead of just surviving. You've found something that matters to you. Don't talk yourself out of it before you even try." Clara wanted to argue further, to list all the reasons it couldn't work. But sitting across from Ethan, seeing his absolute faith in her capabilities, she felt something shift. Maybe he was right. Maybe she'd spent so long protecting herself from disappointment that she'd stopped reaching for anything that mattered. "I'll think about it," she said finally, and this time the words felt less like deflection and more like genuine consideration. Over the next month, Clara did more than think. She approached the town council about using the community hall, and to her surprise, they agreed enthusiastically. She ordered basic school supplies through her mercantile connections, getting better prices than a regular person could, and she quietly spread word that she'd be starting informal lessons 3 afternoons a week for any children whose families were interested. 6 students showed up the first day, Billy and 5 others ranging from age 6 to 12. Clara had been terrified they wouldn't come, or worse, that they'd come and she'd fail them somehow. But as she stood before those eager young faces, something clicked into place. This was right. This was what she was meant to do. Teaching filled a hole in Clara she hadn't fully acknowledged existed. The mercantile had been Thomas's dream, his passion. She'd inherited it and made it work through sheer determination, but it had never been truly hers. This, helping children discover the power of reading, watching their minds expand as they learn new concepts, this felt like coming home to herself. Ethan noticed the change immediately. "You're glowing," he said one Thursday evening as they walked back from the community hall after Clara's lessons. "I've never seen you look this alive." "It feels right," Clara admitted. "In a way the mercantile never has. Does that sound terrible? Like I'm disrespecting Thomas's memory?" "It sounds like you're finally living your own life instead of the one you inherited," Ethan replied. "Thomas would want that for you. He'd want you to be happy." Clara knew he was right, but old guilt still surfaced. "Sometimes I feel like I'm betraying him, building this new life, caring about you, pursuing dreams that don't include him. Like I'm erasing what we had." Ethan stopped walking, turning to face her in the fading light. "You're not erasing anything. What you had with Thomas was real and important, and it shaped who you are. But Clara, he's gone. You're still here. You get to have a future, even if he doesn't. That's not betrayal. That's survival. That's choosing to keep living instead of dying with him." The words hit hard, but they needed to be said. Clara had been carrying guilt like a weight, believing that moving forward somehow diminished what she'd lost. But maybe that wasn't true. Maybe honoring Thomas's memory meant living fully, not staying frozen in the past. "I want a future," Clara said quietly, "with you. And that terrifies me because wanting things means they can be taken away." "They can," Ethan agreed. "I could lose you tomorrow. You could lose me. Life doesn't come with guarantees, Clara. But the alternative, living in fear of loss, never risking anything real, that's not protection. That's just a slower death." Clara stepped closer, closing the distance between them. In the months of courtship, they'd been careful with physical affection. A held hand, a brief embrace, nothing too intimate. But standing there in the winter twilight, Clara felt the walls she'd maintained crumbling completely. "Kiss me," she said, surprising herself with the boldness. Ethan's eyes widened. "Clara, please, I need to know this is real, that I'm not imagining the connection between us." He studied her face for a long moment, perhaps checking for hesitation or doubt. Then, slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind, he cupped her face with both hands and lowered his mouth to hers. The kiss was gentle, almost reverent, but it sparked something in Clara's chest that felt like coming back to life after years of numbness. This was what she'd been missing, not just companionship or partnership, but this visceral connection, this reminder that she was still a woman capable of desire and passion, not just a ghost going through motions. When they finally separated, both breathing hard, Clara felt tears on her cheeks. "I forgot," she whispered. "I forgot what this felt like." What feels like?" Ethan asked gently, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "Feeling, really feeling. Being alive instead of just surviving." She pressed her palm against his chest, feeling his heart beat strong and steady. "I've been so numb for so long, Ethan, but you make me feel things again. And it's terrifying and wonderful, and I don't know how to handle it." "You don't have to handle it alone," he reminded her. "That's the whole point of this, of us. We face things together." They stood there in the gathering darkness, holding each other, and Clara felt something fundamental shift inside her. She'd spent 5 years building walls to protect a heart too damaged to risk again. But Ethan had been patient enough, persistent enough, to dismantle those walls brick by brick. And now, standing in his arms, Clara realized she didn't want the walls back. She wanted this: the risk, the vulnerability, the terrifying possibility that she might lose everything again. Because the alternative, safety purchased with loneliness, was no longer enough. January brought brutal cold that kept most folks indoors except for necessary errands. The mercantile's business slowed to a trickle, giving Clara more time for teaching and for spending time with Ethan. They'd settled into an easy rhythm now, comfortable enough with each other that silence felt companionable rather than awkward. One particularly frigid afternoon, Ethan arrived at the mercantile with a proposal that caught Clara completely off guard. "Come stay at the ranch for a few days," he said without preamble. "The cold snap's supposed to last through the week, and I don't like you being here alone without proper heat. The ranch house has better insulation and a larger fireplace." Clara's immediate instinct was to refuse. Propriety alone should make her decline such an invitation. But something stopped her. They'd been courting for 4 months now, long enough that their intentions were clear to everyone in Red Hollow. And practically speaking, Ethan was right. The mercantile's small wood stove struggled to heat her living quarters adequately during extreme cold. "People will talk," she said finally. "People already talk," Ethan countered. "And Mary could come too, a chaperone. I'm not suggesting anything improper, Clara. I just don't want you freezing alone when there's a warm, safe place available." The fact that he'd thought to include Mary, protecting Clara's reputation, even while extending the invitation, decided her. "All right, let me talk to Mary, and if she's willing, we'll come for a few days." Mary agreed immediately, clearly delighted by the development. They packed minimal belongings and made the journey to Ethan's ranch the following morning, bundled against cold so severe it burned exposed skin. The ranch house was exactly as Clara remembered from her first visit, but Ethan had made improvements over the months. New curtains hung in the windows, handmade furniture filled previously empty rooms, and the whole place felt lived in rather than just occupied. "You've done amazing work here," Clara said, looking around the main room with its large stone fireplace and comfortable seating. "It's starting to feel like home," Ethan agreed, "though it still feels empty sometimes, too big for just one person." The comment hung in the air, weighted with implication. Clara understood what he wasn't quite saying, that he'd built this place hoping to fill it with more than just himself, that he was creating space for a future that might include her. The thought should have panicked her, but instead it filled her with warmth. This man had rebuilt an entire homestead while courting her, creating something solid and lasting that spoke to his intentions more clearly than any words could. Mary claimed the small bedroom upstairs, leaving Clara the main floor guest room that was closer to heat. That first evening, the three of them shared supper around Ethan's table. Simple fare of stew and bread, but the companionship made it feel like a feast. "This is nice," Mary observed, looking between Clara and Ethan with obvious satisfaction. "You two fit together well, like you've been doing this for years instead of months." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she didn't deny it. They did fit well together, finding rhythm in shared tasks and comfortable silences. Ethan washed dishes while Clara dried and Mary put away, the three of them moving around each other with practiced ease. Later, after Mary had retired upstairs, Clara and Ethan sat before the fire, watching flames dance and feeling the cold press against windows. "Can I ask you something?" Clara said into the comfortable silence. "Anything. Are you happy? With how things are between us, I mean. I know I've been difficult." "You haven't been difficult," Ethan interrupted. "You've been cautious, and you had every right to be. But to answer your question, yes, I'm happier than I've been in 4 years. You brought light back into my life, Clara. Even on my worst days, knowing I'll see you makes everything bearable." Clara turned to face him fully, studying the face she'd come to know so well, the lines around his eyes, the scar on his chin from some childhood mishap, the way his jaw tightened when he was holding back emotion. "I'm happy too," she admitted. "Scared, but happy. I didn't think I'd ever feel this way again." "What way?" "Hopeful, like the future might hold good things instead of just more survival." Ethan reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. "It will hold good things. We'll make sure of it." They sat together in the firelight, and Clara felt a contentment she'd never expected to experience again. This wasn't the passionate excitement of young love. It was deeper, steadier, built on foundation of shared grief and hard-won understanding. They'd both been broken by loss and put themselves back together. Now they were choosing to build something new from those scarred pieces. The next 3 days passed in a bubble of domesticity that gave Clara a glimpse of what life could be. She and Ethan worked together on ranch tasks, tended animals, prepared meals, talked for hours about everything and nothing. Mary served as chaperone and cheerful third party, never intrusive but always present enough to maintain propriety. On their final night before returning to town, Ethan built up the fire and asked Clara to walk with him despite the cold. They bundled in heavy coats and stepped onto the front porch, where stars blazed overhead in a sky so clear it hurt to look at. "Clara," Ethan began, his voice rough with nerves. "These past months have been the best of my life since losing Sarah. You've given me hope again, reminded me what it means to actually live instead of just existing. And I need to know, is this temporary for you, or are you building towards something permanent?" Clara's heart hammered. This was it, the conversation she'd been both dreading and anticipating. "What are you asking, Ethan?" "I'm asking if you can see a future with me, a real future. Marriage, partnership, building a life together on this ranch. Because that's what I want, Clara. I want you here permanently, not just visiting. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build something lasting with you." The declaration was bold, direct, terrifying. Clara felt her old fears rise up. What if she said yes and lost him? What if she committed and everything fell apart? What if she wasn't strong enough to survive another loss? But beneath the fear was something stronger: want, need. The absolute certainty that saying no to protect herself would destroy her just as surely as loss could. "Yes," Clara heard herself say. "I can see a future with you. I want a future with you." Ethan's breath released in a visible cloud. "You mean it?" "I'm terrified," Clara admitted. "Absolutely terrified. But I'm saying yes anyway because living without you would be worse than any risk. You've shown me what partnership looks like, Ethan. What it means to be truly seen and valued. I can't go back to surviving alone. I don't want to." He pulled her into his arms, and Clara went willingly, letting herself be held against his chest, where she could hear his heart beating strong and steady. They stood there on the porch, while cold pressed around them, and stars wheeled overhead, holding each other like anchors against the vastness of possibility. "We'll do this right," Ethan murmured into her hair. "Proper courtship, proper engagement, proper wedding. I want everyone to know you chose me, and I chose you. No doubts, no questions, no room for people to talk." "I don't care what people say anymore," Clara said, and realized it was true. "As long as I have you, the rest doesn't matter." "You have me," Ethan promised. "For as long as you'll have me." "I'm yours, Clara Whitmore, completely and without reservation." The words settled into Clara's chest, warm and solid and real. She'd spent 5 years believing she'd never have this again, this connection, this partnership, this terrifying, beautiful possibility of building something lasting. But here it was, offered freely by a man who understood her scars because he carried his own. "I'm yours too," she whispered, "and that terrifies me. But I'm choosing it anyway." They returned inside where Mary was reading by the fire, and one look at their faces told her everything she needed to know. "Finally," Mary said with satisfaction. "I thought you two would never get there." The ride back to Red Hollow the next morning felt different. Clara was no longer the isolated widow protecting herself from connection. She was a woman with a future, a partner, plans extending beyond just the next day's survival. The shift was subtle but profound, changing how she saw everything from the snow-covered landscape to her small mercantile to her own reflection in windows. News of their engagement spread through Red Hollow within hours of their return. Clara hadn't announced it formally, but something in her bearing must have changed because people knew. The questions came immediately. When would they marry? Where would they live? What would happen to the mercantile? Clara answered honestly. They'd marry in spring, giving time for proper preparation. She'd move to the ranch, but keep running the mercantile with help from a hired assistant. Her teaching would continue. In fact, she hoped to expand it, perhaps building a proper schoolhouse on land adjacent to the ranch. Planning a future felt strange after years of living day to day, but it also felt right, like pieces finally fitting together after being scattered for too long. Ethan came to town more frequently now, and they made decisions together about everything from wedding details to ranch improvements. Clara found herself consulting him on mercantile matters she'd always handled alone, valuing his perspective even when they disagreed. This was partnership, not one person leading while the other followed, but two equals building something together. Not everything was smooth. Old fears still surfaced, usually at night when Clara lay awake wondering if she was making a terrible mistake. Panic attacks came without warning, leaving her breathless and certain that disaster was imminent. But now, instead of hiding these struggles, she shared them with Ethan. And he did the same, admitting his own moments of terror when the old grief surfaced or when fear of losing her became overwhelming. "We're both damaged," Clara said one evening when they'd both confessed recent panic. "Maybe that never fully goes away." "Maybe it doesn't need to," Ethan replied. "Maybe we just learn to carry it better, together." February brought the first hints of spring. Longer days, milder temperatures, snow beginning to melt. Clara's teaching had expanded to 15 students, and the town council had approved plans for a small schoolhouse to be built in summer. The mercantile thrived under her management and the part-time help she'd hired. Everything was coming together in ways Clara had never imagined possible. One afternoon, as Clara worked with her students, she looked around at their eager faces and felt overwhelming gratitude. A year ago, she'd been frozen in grief, convinced her life was over except for the tedious business of surviving. Now she had purpose, passion, partnership, and plans extending into a future that looked bright instead of bleak. Ethan arrived as lessons were ending, leaning against the doorframe and watching her work with a smile that made her heart flutter, even after months together. When the last student had left, he crossed to where she stood organizing materials. "You're beautiful when you teach," he said. "Did you know that? You light up like you're exactly where you're supposed to be." "I think I am," Clara replied softly. "For the first time in years, I feel like I'm living the life I'm meant to have instead of just the one I inherited." "That's because you chose it," Ethan said. "You chose to take risks, build something new, let someone in. You chose to live instead of just survive." Clara set down the books she'd been stacking and moved into his arms, letting herself be held in the fading afternoon light. "We chose," she corrected. "This isn't just my choice, it's ours. We're building this together." "Together," Ethan agreed, his arms tightening around her. "That's what makes it work." Standing there in the community hall where she taught children to read and dream and reach for more than mere survival, Clara Whitmore felt something she'd thought permanently lost. Peace. Not the absence of fear or pain or grief, but the presence of something stronger. Hope, purpose, partnership, and the bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The journey from broken widow to woman building a future had been terrifying, full of setbacks and panic and moments when giving up seemed easier than continuing. But she'd made it through to the other side, not alone, but accompanied by someone who understood her scars because he carried his own. Tomorrow, they'd face new challenges. There would be difficult days, moments of doubt, old grief surfacing when least expected. But they'd face it together, two people choosing each other despite all the reasons not to risk connection again. And that choice, to risk love despite knowing loss, to build despite uncertainty, to live despite fear, that was the bravest thing Clara had ever done. The weeks that followed passed in a whirlwind of planning and preparation that left Clara simultaneously exhilarated and overwhelmed. Wedding arrangements had to be made, the mercantile's transition planned, her belongings sorted between what would move to the ranch and what would stay. Every decision felt momentous, every choice a step toward a future that still seemed half-imagined despite its growing reality. But it was during one quiet evening in early March, as Clara sat in her living quarters reviewing ledgers, that the past came crashing back with devastating force. A letter arrived by stage courier, postmarked from St. Louis. Clara opened it absently, expecting perhaps news from a distant supplier or some administrative matter. Instead, she found herself staring at handwriting she recognized immediately. Thomas's brother, Edward, whom she hadn't heard from since the funeral 5 years ago. Her hands trembled as she read the contents. Edward was coming to Red Hollow. He'd heard through mutual acquaintances about her engagement to Ethan, and he had concerns he needed to address in person. He'd arrive within the week. Clara set the letter down carefully, her mind reeling. Edward had never approved of her, had made that clear during her marriage to Thomas. He'd thought his brother could do better than a Missouri orphan with no family connections or dowry. After Thomas's death, Edward had offered to buy the mercantile for a fraction of its worth, clearly expecting Clara to fail and be grateful for any offer. When she'd refused, he'd left in anger, telling her she'd regret her pride. She hadn't heard from him since. Until now. The letter's tone was formal, almost cold, but the implication was clear. Edward didn't approve of her remarriage, and he was coming to make his disapproval known. Clara's first instinct was panic. What if Edward caused trouble? What if he poisoned Ethan against her somehow? What if he dredged up the past in ways that made her look incompetent or unworthy? Her second instinct was anger. She'd survived 5 years without Edward's help or approval. She'd paid off every debt Thomas had left, kept the mercantile afloat through sheer determination, and built a life worth living. Edward had no right to judge her choices now. But beneath both panic and anger was something deeper. The old fear that she wasn't good enough, that happiness would always be snatched away, that she didn't deserve the future she was trying to build. She was still sitting frozen when Mary knocked on her door, having noticed the mercantile lights burning late. "Clara? What's wrong?" Mary took one look at her friend's face and crossed immediately to her side. Clara handed her the letter wordlessly. Mary read it, her expression darkening with each line. "That pompous—" Mary stopped herself with visible effort. "What does he want?" "To cause trouble, probably. To remind me that I'm not good enough for his family name, even though Thomas has been dead for 5 years." Clara's voice cracked. "Mary, what if he ruins everything? What if he says something to Ethan that makes him realize he's making a mistake?" "Ethan knows who you are," Mary said firmly. "Some bitter letter from a man who abandoned you years ago won't change that. You don't know Edward. He's persuasive, educated, connected. He'll make me sound like some opportunistic widow looking to trap another husband." "Then you tell Ethan first," Mary interrupted. "Before Edward arrives. Tell him everything about the debts, the struggles, Edward's disapproval, all of it. Don't let Edward control the narrative." Clara knew Mary was right, but the thought of voluntarily exposing all her old failures and inadequacies made her feel sick. She'd worked so hard to move past that version of herself, the desperate widow barely keeping her head above water. Did she really have to resurrect those memories now? But the alternative, letting Edward arrive and paint whatever picture he wanted, was worse. The next morning, Clara rode out to the ranch earlier than planned. Ethan was working in the barn when she arrived, and one look at her face brought him immediately to her side. "What happened?" He caught her horse's reins, helping her dismount with steady hands. "I need to talk to you," Clara said, "about my past, about things I should have told you before now." They went inside where Clara wouldn't have to meet his eyes constantly. She poured out the whole story. Thomas's hidden debts, the creditors who'd circled like vultures, the 2 years of desperate poverty while she fought to keep the mercantile. She told him about Edward's contempt, his insulting buyout offer, the way he'd made her feel small and worthless. "And now he's coming here," Clara finished. "He says he has concerns about our engagement. I think he wants to cause trouble, maybe try to convince you I'm not worth marrying." Ethan had listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. Now he stood and moved to where Clara sat, kneeling before her chair so they were at eye level. "Clara, look at me." She forced herself to meet his gaze, expecting to see doubt or disappointment. Instead, she saw something that looked like anger, but not directed at her. "You survived all of that alone?" Ethan's voice was rough. 2 years of poverty and harassment from creditors, plus dealing with a man who should have helped you but chose to judge you instead?" "I didn't have a choice," Clara said quietly. "I had to survive or give up entirely." "You had a choice every single day," Ethan corrected. "You could have sold out to Edward for pennies, could have given up and left Red Hollow, could have let the creditors win. But you didn't. You fought, Clara. You built something from nothing while grieving and alone. That's not weakness. That's the strongest thing I've ever heard." Clara felt tears spill over. "I thought if you knew how bad it was, how close I came to losing everything, I'd what? Think less of you?" Ethan cupped her face gently. "Clara, this doesn't make me doubt you. It makes me respect you even more. You survived hell and came out stronger. That's exactly who I want beside me. Someone who knows how to fight, how to endure, how to keep going when everything seems impossible." "But Edward can say whatever he wants," Ethan said firmly. "It won't change anything. I know who you are. I've seen you build a business, teach children, create a life from ruins. Some bitter man's opinion means nothing compared to what I've witnessed myself." Clara searched his face for any sign of doubt or hesitation, but found only certainty. He meant it. Her past didn't diminish her in his eyes. If anything, it reinforced what he already knew about her strength and resilience. "I was so afraid to tell you," she whispered. "I know. But you told me anyway, even though it scared you. That's what partnership means, Clara. Trusting each other with the hard truths, not just the easy parts." They held each other for a long moment, and Clara felt the crushing weight of fear begin to lift. She'd faced her worst nightmare, exposing her most painful failures to someone she loved, and he hadn't recoiled. He'd moved closer instead. Edward Whitmore arrived in Red Hollow 6 days later on the afternoon stage, dressed in an expensive suit that announced his city prosperity to everyone watching. He was a tall man in his 40s, with Thomas's brown eyes, but none of his late brother's warmth. Everything about Edward radiated cold judgment. Clara had prepared carefully for this confrontation. She'd told Ethan everything, enlisted Mary as moral support, and steeled herself against whatever Edward might say. She was no longer the desperate widow he'd last seen. She was a successful businesswoman and engaged to a good man. Edward couldn't hurt her unless she let him. She received him in the mercantile, keeping the encounter on her territory. Mary stayed nearby, ostensibly organizing inventory, but clearly within earshot. "Clara," Edward greeted her with minimal warmth. "You look well." "Thank you, Edward. What brings you to Red Hollow?" She kept her voice professionally neutral. "I think you know." He glanced around the mercantile with an expression that suggested he was cataloging its value. "I heard about your engagement to a rancher named Calloway. Word travels fast. Small towns talk." Edward turned his attention back to her. "I felt obligated to come, given our family connection, to ensure you're making a wise decision." The condescension in his tone made Clara's jaw tighten, but she kept her composure. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions." "Are you?" Edward's eyebrows rose. "Forgive me, but your decision-making hasn't always been sound. Refusing my generous offer to buy this establishment, for instance. Struggling for years when you could have taken a fair price and moved on." "Your offer was insulting, not generous," Clara said flatly. "You wanted to buy a thriving business for less than the value of its inventory alone." "I was trying to help you avoid the embarrassment of inevitable failure," Edward countered. "Though I'll admit, I'm surprised you've managed to keep it afloat this long. My brother always said you were stubborn." The casual dismissal of her years of hard work sparked anger in Clara's chest, but before she could respond, the mercantile door opened and Ethan walked in. He must have been watching for Edward's arrival, because there was no surprise in his expression as he crossed directly to Clara's side. His hand found the small of her back in a gesture that was both possessive and supportive. "You must be Edward Whitmore," Ethan said, his voice pleasant but carrying an edge. "I'm Ethan Calloway." Edward assessed Ethan with the same calculating look he'd given the mercantile. "Mr. Calloway, I'd like to speak with you privately about your engagement to my sister-in-law." "Claire's not your sister-in-law," Ethan corrected mildly. "She was married to your brother who died 5 years ago. That connection ended with his death. Nevertheless, I have concerns." "Then you can share them with both of us," Ethan interrupted. "Clara and I don't keep secrets from each other." Edward's expression soured. "Very well. I'll be direct. I'm concerned that you don't fully understand Clara's circumstances. Her financial history, the debts my brother left, the fact that she nearly lost everything." "I know all of it," Ethan said calmly. "Clara told me herself about the debts, the struggles, and your insulting offer to exploit her vulnerability." Edward's face flushed. "I was offering assistance. You were offering to profit from your brother's widow's desperation," Ethan said, his voice hardening. "There's a difference, and the fact that Clara refused your so-called help and succeeded anyway tells me everything I need to know about her character." "She's clearly told you a very one-sided version." "She told me the truth," Ethan interrupted again. "And I've seen the evidence of it myself. A thriving business built from near bankruptcy. A woman who could have taken the easy route and given up, but chose to fight instead. That's exactly the kind of partner I want. Someone who knows how to survive hard times and come out stronger." Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. Ethan was defending her, but not in a way that made her seem helpless or in need of protection. He was highlighting her strength, her competence, her victory over circumstances that would have broken most people. Edward seemed to realize he was losing ground. "What about children?" he asked suddenly, turning to Clara. "You and Thomas never had children. What if you can't give Mr. Calloway heirs? The cruelty of the question stole Clara's breath. It was a wound she'd carried silently. The fact that she and Thomas had tried for years without success. That she'd wondered if something was wrong with her. To have Edward weaponize that pain now felt like a physical blow. But before she could formulate a response, Ethan's voice cut through the tension like a blade. That's enough. His tone was quiet, but absolutely cold. Clara's worth has nothing to do with her ability to bear children. She's valuable because of who she is. Intelligent, capable, resilient, compassionate. If we're blessed with children, that will be wonderful. If we're not, we'll build a full life anyway. Either way, it's none of your business. I'm simply trying to ensure you understand. What I understand, Ethan said, is that you came here to undermine Clara because you can't stand that she succeeded without you, that she built a life you predicted would fail. You wanted her to be dependent and desperate so you could swoop in as the generous relative, probably at great profit to yourself. But she didn't need you then, and she certainly doesn't need your approval now. Edward's face had gone from flushed to pale. You have no right. I have every right, Ethan said firmly. I'm going to marry Clara, and that means protecting her from people who try to make her feel small, including you. He turned to Clara, his expression softening. Do you want him to stay, or should I escort him to the stage station? Clara looked at Edward, at this man who represented everything toxic about her past, who'd offered criticism instead of support, who'd predicted her failure and was now bitter about being proven wrong. For years, his disapproval had haunted her, making her question her worth and competence. But standing there beside Ethan, seeing herself through his eyes instead of Edward's, Clara realized something profound. Edward's opinion didn't matter. It never had. He was a small, bitter man trying to feel important by diminishing others. His judgment said nothing about her worth and everything about his character. The stage leaves in an hour, Clara said quietly. I think you should be on it, Edward. You're not welcome in my home or my business, and you're certainly not invited to my wedding. Edward sputtered, clearly shocked that she'd dismiss him so directly. You'll regret this. When this engagement falls apart and you're alone again, if that happens, I'll handle it, Clara interrupted. Just like I've handled everything else life has thrown at me, without your help and without your approval. Goodbye, Edward. She turned away, making the dismissal physical. After a moment of shocked silence, Edward grabbed his hat and stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. In the sudden quiet, Clara realized she was shaking, not with fear or doubt, but with adrenaline and something that felt like triumph. She'd faced down the man who'd haunted her worst insecurities and sent him away. She'd chosen to believe in herself and in Ethan, rather than letting old wounds dictate her future. You all right? Ethan asked softly. Clara turned to face him, and despite the trembling, she found herself smiling. I'm better than all right. I think I just took back the last piece of myself I'd given to the past. Ethan pulled her into his arms, and Clara went willingly, letting herself be held while the enormity of what had just happened settled over her. Mary appeared from behind a shelf, abandoning all pretense of working. That was magnificent, Mary said, her eyes bright. Both of you. The way you stood up to that horrible man. Clara, I'm so proud of you. I couldn't have done it without Ethan, Clara said, pulling back enough to look at him. The way you defended me highlighted my strength instead of my struggles. I just told the truth, Ethan said simply. You are strong. You did survive impossible circumstances. Edward was trying to make your past sound like failure, but it's actually your greatest triumph. Clara felt tears spill over, but they were good tears, the kind that came from being truly seen and valued. Thank you for believing in me even when I struggled to believe in myself. That's what partners do, Ethan reminded her. We hold faith for each other when our own runs out. The confrontation with Edward, while painful, proved to be a turning point. Something shifted in Clara after sending him away, a final severing of ties to the version of herself who'd believed she was fundamentally insufficient. Edward's disapproval had been a weight she'd carried unconsciously for years, a voice in her head questioning every decision. But now that voice was gone, replaced by certainty that she was exactly who and where she was supposed to be. Wedding preparations continued with renewed energy. Clara threw herself into planning with an enthusiasm that surprised her. She'd always imagined that remarrying would feel like betraying Thomas, but instead it felt like honoring the life she still had. Thomas would want her to be happy. She knew that now with bone-deep certainty. He'd want her to build a full life rather than existing as a ghost of her former self. The wedding was set for the first Saturday in May, when the prairie would be blooming and the worst of winter's cold would be past. Clara chose a dress of cream-colored silk that Mary helped her sew, with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. It wasn't the white gown of a first wedding, but it felt appropriate, elegant and mature, befitting a woman who'd lived through loss and found love again. The night before the wedding, Clara sat alone in her small living quarters for the last time. Tomorrow she'd move permanently to the ranch, beginning a new chapter in a new home. She looked around at the space that had been her sanctuary and prison for 5 years, the narrow bed where she'd cried herself to sleep so many nights, the table where she'd pored over ledgers trying to make numbers work, the window where she'd watched seasons change while feeling frozen in time. This place had saved her and trapped her in equal measure. Now it was time to leave it behind. She picked up the wooden box Ethan had carved for her months ago, running her fingers over the familiar wildflowers. Inside were all the small treasures of their courtship: pressed flowers, smooth stones, notes and ribbons and bits of memory. Evidence of a man who'd seen her worth when she couldn't see it herself. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Clara opened the door to find Mary standing there with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "Thought you might want company on your last night as a single woman," Mary said. They sat together drinking wine and talking about everything and nothing, memories of the past 5 years, hopes for the future, the journey from broken widow to woman on the verge of new beginning. "I'm proud of you," Mary said as the evening wound down. "Not just for finding Ethan, but for finding yourself again, for choosing to live instead of just survive." "I couldn't have done it without you," Clara replied. "You pushed me when I needed pushing, held me when I needed holding. You never let me give up completely. That's what friends do." Mary squeezed her hand. "But Clara, the hard work was all you. You chose to take risks, open your heart, build something new. That took real courage." After Mary left, Clara stood at her window one final time, looking out at Red Hollow's quiet streets. Somewhere out there was the ranch where Ethan was probably also sleepless with anticipation. Tomorrow they'd join their lives officially, claiming each other in front of the whole town. The thought still carried a flutter of fear, but it was drowned out by something stronger: anticipation, excitement, joy. She was ready to take this leap, ready to trust that happiness didn't have to be temporary, ready to believe she deserved good things. The wedding day dawned clear and warm, with spring sunshine streaming through windows and wildflowers blooming across the prairie. The ceremony would take place in the community hall, transformed with garlands of flowers and greenery that made it look almost magical. Clara dressed carefully with Mary's help, her hands trembling slightly as she fastened the pearl necklace that had been her mother's, something old to carry forward, a link to family long gone but not forgotten. "You look beautiful," Mary said softly, stepping back to assess her work. "Ethan's going to forget how to breathe when he sees you." Clara studied herself in the small mirror, barely recognizing the woman looking back. This wasn't the grief-hollowed widow she'd been for so long. This was someone new, scarred but healing, cautious but hopeful, ready to embrace life instead of just enduring it. The walk to the community hall felt surreal. People lined the street, neighbors who'd watched her struggle and survive calling out congratulations and good wishes. Clara held her head high, no longer ashamed of her past or afraid of her future. Inside the hall, chairs had been arranged in neat rows, filled with what seemed like the entire population of Red Hollow. At the front stood Ethan, dressed in his best suit, and when his eyes found Clara across the distance, the expression on his face made her breath catch. He looked at her like she was the answer to every question he'd ever asked. Clara walked down the makeshift aisle with Mary beside her, since she had no father or male relative to give her away. But she didn't need to be given. She was choosing this freely, walking into her future with open eyes and willing heart. When she reached Ethan, he took her hands in his, and Clara felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. This man, this moment, this choice, all of it was exactly as it should be. The ceremony was simple but meaningful. The circuit preacher spoke about partnership and perseverance, about building lives that honored both past and future. Then came the vows, and Clara found herself saying words she'd never thought she'd speak again. I take you, Ethan Calloway, to be my husband, she said, her voice clear and strong. I promise to stand beside you in joy and sorrow, to build a life with you based on honesty and respect, to choose you every day for as long as we both shall live. You've shown me that hearts can heal and futures can be rebuilt. I'm grateful for your patience, your strength, and your unwavering belief in our partnership. Ethan's eyes were suspiciously bright as he recited his own vows. I take you, Clara Whitmore, to be my wife. I promise to honor your strength, value your wisdom, and protect your heart while trusting you to protect mine. You've taught me that love doesn't end with loss, that new beginnings are possible even after devastating endings. I choose you, today and every day, to build a future that honors our past without being trapped by them. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan drew Clara into a kiss that was both tender and claiming, and the hall erupted in applause and cheers. Clara clung to him, feeling tears stream down her face. Happy tears, healing tears, tears that washed away the last remnants of the grief that had defined her for so long. The celebration that followed was joyous and chaotic, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the evening. Clara found herself swept up in it, accepting congratulations and best wishes from people she'd held at arm's length for years. The isolation she'd maintained for self-protection had dissolved, replaced by genuine connection with the community she'd been part of but never fully engaged with. Late in the evening, as the party was winding down, Ethan pulled Clara aside to a quiet corner. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Calloway?" he asked, and the new name sent a thrill through her. Overwhelmed, happy, terrified, grateful. Clara laughed. "All of it at once. Second thoughts?" "Not even for a moment," Clara said firmly. "This is exactly where I want to be, with you, building this life, taking this risk. I'm still scared sometimes, but I'm not letting fear control me anymore." Ethan kissed her gently. "We should head to the ranch, start our new life properly." They left amid showers of rice and well wishes, climbing into the wagon Ethan had decorated with ribbons and bells. The ride to the ranch happened in comfortable silence, both of them processing the enormity of what they'd just done. When they arrived, Ethan carried Clara over the threshold of what was now their home, a gesture that was traditional but also symbolic. They were truly beginning again, leaving the past behind while carrying its lessons forward. Inside, the ranch house glowed with lamplight and warmth. Ethan had prepared everything carefully, flowers in vases, fire burning in the hearth, their bedroom arranged with care and respect for Clara's comfort. "I know this is a big transition," Ethan said as they stood together in the main room. "We can take things as slowly as you need. There's no rush, no pressure." Clara silenced him with a kiss, pouring into it all the emotion she couldn't quite put into words. When they finally separated, both breathing hard, she smiled up at him. "I love you," she said, the words coming easier than she'd expected. "I think I've loved you for months, but was too afraid to say it. But I'm saying it now. I love you, Ethan Calloway. I love your patience and your strength and the way you see the best in me even when I can't see it myself." "I love you too," Ethan said, his voice rough with emotion. "I think I've loved you since the day you rode out to my ranch, terrified but determined to try anyway. You're the bravest person I know, Clara, and I'm honored that you chose to take this risk with me." They stood together in their new home, holding each other, while the fire crackled and the night deepened around them. This was just the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, difficult days, moments when old grief surfaced. But they'd face it together, two people who'd survived the worst and chosen to build something beautiful from the ruins. The months that followed were an adjustment, but a joyful one. Clara learned the rhythms of ranch life while maintaining her teaching and oversight of the mercantile. Ethan proved to be a true partner, sharing work and decisions equally, never assuming his way was automatically right. They disagreed sometimes, argued occasionally, but always came back to the foundation of respect and affection they'd built. Summer brought the construction of the new schoolhouse on ranch land, fulfilling Clara's dream of creating a real educational opportunity for Red Hollow's children. By fall, she had 23 students ranging from age 5 to 15, all eager to learn. Watching the school grow, seeing children's minds expand and possibilities open, filled Clara with purpose that went beyond mere survival. The mercantile continued to thrive under the management of the assistant Clara had hired, a young widow herself who needed the work, and proved remarkably capable. Clara checked in regularly, but no longer poured every waking hour into the business. She'd learned to delegate, to trust others, to build a life that included work, but wasn't consumed by it. One evening in late October, nearly 6 months after the wedding, Clara and Ethan sat on their porch watching the sun set over the prairie in shades of gold and amber. The air carried the crisp promise of winter, but for now it was perfect, cool enough to be comfortable, warm enough to linger outside. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked suddenly. "Choosing me? Taking on all my complications?" Ethan turned to look at her, genuine surprise on his face. "Not for a single moment. Why would you ask that?" "I don't know. Sometimes I still can't quite believe this is real, that I get to be this happy after everything that happened." "You deserve happiness," Ethan said firmly. "You survived hell and built something beautiful from the ashes. If anyone's earned the right to joy, it's you." Clara leaned against him, letting herself be held while colors shifted across the vast Montana sky. "I used to think my life ended when Thomas died, that everything after was just aftermath, just going through motions until I could stop. But this," she gestured at the ranch, the school visible in the distance, the life they'd built together. "This isn't aftermath. This is a whole new story." "The best stories have multiple chapters," Ethan observed. "What you had with Thomas was real and important, but it was one chapter, not the whole book. Now we're writing new chapters together." The metaphor resonated deeply. Clara had been stuck in a single chapter for 5 years, unable to turn the page because she'd believed the story ended with loss. But Ethan had shown her that new chapters were possible, that life could continue and even flourish after devastating endings. "I'm grateful," Clara said softly, "for you, for this life, for the courage to try again. You gave me back something I thought was gone forever." "What's that?" "Hope. Real hope, not just desperate survival. The belief that tomorrow might bring joy instead of just more of the same struggle." Ethan kissed the top of her head. "You gave yourself that, Clara. I just reminded you it was possible. The courage to actually reach for it. That was all you." They sat together as darkness fell and stars emerged. Two people who'd found each other in grief and built something lasting from shared understanding. The ranch was quiet except for distant sounds of horses and the gentle prairie wind. This was home now, not the small rooms behind the mercantile where Clara had hidden from life, but this expansive place full of possibility and partnership. Winter came and proved harsh, but Clara and Ethan weathered it together. The ranch provided warmth and security. The school continued through cold months with students bundled in heavy coats, and the mercantile served the community's needs as it always had. Clara discovered she was stronger than she'd known, more capable of handling hardship when she wasn't facing it alone. Spring returned, bringing with it an unexpected gift. In late April, Clara realized she'd missed her monthly courses. At first, she dismissed it as stress or the natural changes of approaching middle age. But as weeks passed and other symptoms appeared, she began to hope for something she'd long ago accepted would never happen. The doctor confirmed it in early May, exactly 1 year after her wedding. Clara was pregnant. The news sent her reeling with a complicated mix of joy and terror. She'd wanted children desperately during her marriage to Thomas, had grieved every month when it became clear it wouldn't happen. She'd made peace with childlessness, built a life that felt full even without biological children through her teaching. But now, at 33, she was being offered this unexpected gift, and the fear was overwhelming. What if something went wrong? What if she lost the baby like Ethan had lost his daughter? What if this happiness was temporary, another thing that would be ripped away? She told Ethan that evening as they sat together after supper. He went very still, his face cycling through shock, joy, and then fear that mirrored her own. "Are you sure?" he asked. "The doctor confirmed it. I'm about 2 months along, he thinks." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, and Clara saw him wrestling with the same demons she faced. His first child had died before taking a single breath. The trauma of that loss lived in him still, even though he'd learned to carry it. "Are you happy?" Clara asked quietly. "Or just terrified?" "Both," Ethan admitted. "I'm thrilled, Clara. The idea of having a child with you, it's more than I dared hope for. But I'm also scared out of my mind. What if history repeats itself? What if something goes wrong?" "I know," Clara said. I'm terrified too. But Ethan, we can't let fear of loss prevent us from experiencing joy. Isn't that what you taught me? That living means risking, that we can't control outcomes, but we can choose how we engage with possibilities? A slow smile spread across Ethan's face. You're using my own words against me? They were good words. True words. Clara took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. This is terrifying and wonderful and completely unexpected. But it's ours. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. Ethan pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was infinitely precious. We're going to have a baby, he whispered, and Clara heard wonder and fear and hope all tangled together in his voice. We're going to have a baby, Clara echoed, and let herself feel the full weight of it, the terror and the joy, the risk and the possibility. The pregnancy progressed normally through summer and into fall. Clara continued teaching until her growing belly made it impractical, then handed her classes temporarily to a young woman from the nearby town who'd been trained as a teacher. The mercantile continued under her assistant's capable management, and the ranch thrived under Ethan's careful stewardship and Clara's growing involvement. They prepared carefully for the baby's arrival, setting up a nursery in one of the ranch house's spare rooms, acquiring everything a newborn might need, trying to balance hope with the protective numbness that came from knowing how badly things could go wrong. Mary was a constant presence, offering both practical help and emotional support. She sewed baby clothes, organized supplies, and most importantly reminded Clara that fear was normal but didn't have to be consuming. You can't control this, Mary said one afternoon as they sat together folding tiny garments. You can't ensure everything will be perfect just by worrying enough, so you might as well let yourself be happy while you can. It was permission Clara needed. She'd been holding herself back from full joy, afraid that investing too much hope would make potential loss more devastating. But Mary was right. The fear would exist regardless. She might as well experience the happiness too. December arrived with its familiar cold, and Clara grew large and uncomfortable in the final weeks of pregnancy. The doctor visited regularly, pronouncing everything normal and healthy, but Clara and Ethan both carried tension they couldn't quite shake. They'd both lost too much to trust easily in good outcomes. Clara went into labor on a frigid night in mid-December, 2 weeks before the doctor had predicted. Ethan sent for the doctor and Mary while doing his best to keep Clara comfortable and calm, though his own fear was evident in every movement. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the following afternoon. There were moments when Clara was certain something was wrong, when pain overwhelmed her and fear whispered that she was going to lose everything. But Mary held her hand and Ethan never left her side, and somehow she kept going. Finally, as winter afternoon light slanted through the bedroom windows, Clara's daughter entered the world with a fierce cry that was the most beautiful sound anyone present had ever heard. "She's breathing," the doctor announced, and the relief in his voice suggested he'd been as worried as everyone else. "Healthy lungs, good color. You have a daughter, Mrs. Calloway." Clara reached for the baby with trembling arms, and when the small red squalling bundle was placed against her chest, she felt something crack open inside her that had been locked tight for years. This was her child, her daughter, alive and screaming and perfect. She looked up to find Ethan crying openly, his face transformed by joy and relief. He'd lost a daughter once. Now he had another chance. "What should we name her?" Clara asked, her voice hoarse from hours of labor. Ethan reached out to touch the baby's tiny hand with one finger. "What about hope? Because that's what she represents. Hope that good things can happen even after terrible loss. Hope that life continues and brings joy we never expected." Clara felt tears stream down her face. "Hope," she agreed. "Hope Calloway. It's perfect." They sat together. Clara exhausted but euphoric, Ethan awed and grateful, and tiny Hope already making her presence known with occasional squeaks and movements. Mary bustled around tidying and checking on Clara's condition, but her eyes kept returning to the baby with undisguised delight. "She's beautiful," Mary said softly. "Absolutely perfect." "She is," Clara agreed, unable to look away from her daughter's face. This tiny person who somehow existed, who'd grown inside her and now breathed air and occupied space in the world. The magnitude of it was overwhelming. That night, After Mary and the doctor had gone and Hope was sleeping in her cradle beside the bed, Clara lay in Ethan's arms, feeling utterly exhausted and completely content. "We did it," she whispered. "We built this life. Against all odds, despite all our fears, we actually did it." "You did it," Ethan corrected. "You were so brave, Clara. Through everything, the pregnancy, the labor, all of it. I'm in awe of you." "We did it together," Clara insisted. "None of this would exist without you. The life we built, this family, you made it possible by refusing to let me hide, by pushing me to take risks even when I was terrified." Hope stirred in her cradle, making small sounds that weren't quite cries but suggested she might be working up to them. Ethan rose to check on her, lifting her gently and bringing her back to the bed so Clara could nurse. Watching him cradle their daughter with such tenderness, seeing the love and wonder on his face, Clara felt her heart expand beyond what she'd thought possible. This man had lost everything and rebuilt from ruins. He'd taken a chance on a broken widow who could barely look him in the eye, shown patience when she'd tried to push him away, and built a partnership based on genuine respect and affection. And now they had this, a family, a home, a future that stretched bright with possibility. "Thank you," Clara said softly as Hope latched on to nurse. "For what?" "For not giving up on me. For seeing potential in someone who'd given up on herself. For teaching me that surviving isn't enough, that life is meant to be lived fully even when that means risking pain." Ethan settled beside her, his arm around her shoulders while Hope nursed contentedly. "Thank you for being brave enough to try, for taking the risk even though everything in your past told you it was dangerous, for choosing to live instead of just exist." They sat together in the quiet ranch house while their daughter fed and winter wind whispered against windows. Outside, the Montana prairie stretched vast and dark under stars, the same landscape that had witnessed Clara's grief and survival and eventual healing. She thought about the woman she'd been 5 years ago, hollow and desperate, barely hanging on, convinced her life had ended with Thomas's death. That woman would never have believed this future was possible, would never have imagined she could be sitting here with a new husband and newborn daughter, filled with contentment instead of just grim determination to survive another day. But she'd been wrong. Life hadn't ended. It had just changed form, requiring her to be braver than she'd known she could be, to take risks she'd sworn she'd never take again, to believe in possibilities when every experience told her to protect herself instead. The journey from that broken widow to this moment had been terrifying. There had been setbacks and panic attacks and moments when giving up seemed easier than continuing. But she'd kept going, one small step at a time, until she'd traveled so far from where she started that the woman she'd been seemed like a stranger. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked, reading her contemplative expression. "About how far I've come," Clara said softly. "About the woman I was when you first walked into the mercantile, and how different everything is now. I was so closed off, so determined to never risk anything again, and now look at us." "You were never as closed off as you thought," Ethan observed. "Even that first day I saw glimpses of who you really were underneath the careful walls, the intelligence, the strength, the capacity for joy you'd locked away. I just had to be patient enough to let you remember it yourself." Clara smiled, shifting Hope to her shoulder to burp her. "You were very patient. I gave you plenty of reasons to give up." "You were worth the wait," Ethan said simply. "You still are. Every day you're worth it." Hope let out a small burp and settled contentedly against Clara's shoulder, her tiny body warm and solid and real. This was what happiness felt like, Clara realized. Not the absence of fear or pain or uncertainty, but the presence of love strong enough to make the risks worthwhile. She'd spent 5 years trying to protect herself from loss by refusing to have anything that could be taken away. But that hadn't protected her. It had just trapped her in a half-life of numb survival. Real protection came from building something strong enough to weather storms, from partnering with someone who understood scars because he carried his own, from choosing courage even when fear screamed to run. "I love you," Clara said, looking between Ethan and Hope. "Both of you, more than I thought possible. You're my whole world now, and that terrifies me, but I'm choosing it anyway." "That's all we can do," Ethan said. "Choose love despite fear, choose hope despite uncertainty. Choose to build despite knowing that nothing is guaranteed. That's what makes us human, Clara. That's what makes life worth living." Hope had fallen asleep against Clara's shoulder, her small breaths warm and even. Clara eased her back into the cradle, tucking her in with gentle hands, then returned to Ethan's embrace. Outside, the December wind howled across the frozen prairie, but inside the ranch house, everything was warm and safe and infinitely precious. This was home, not a place but a collection of people, a chosen family built from the ruins of lost ones, a future forged through courage and persistence, and the willingness to keep trying even when everything seemed impossible. Clara Calloway, no longer Clara Whitmore, no longer defined by loss, settled into her husband's arms and let herself feel the full weight of happiness. It was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure, this vulnerability that came from having everything to lose. But it was also real, solid, worth every moment of fear it took to claim it. She'd survived the worst life could throw at her and emerged not broken, but stronger. She'd learned that hearts could heal, that futures could be rebuilt, that love was possible even after devastating loss. And most importantly, she'd learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the choice to move forward despite it. As she drifted towards sleep, surrounded by everything she'd fought so hard to build, Clara felt a peace she'd thought permanently lost. This was what it meant to live. Not just survive, not just endure, but truly live with open heart and willing spirit. The journey from broken widow to beloved wife and new mother had been the hardest thing she'd ever done. But lying here in the warmth and safety of her chosen life, Clara knew with absolute certainty that it had been worth every terrifying step. She had chosen courage. She had chosen love. She had chosen to live. And in the quiet Montana night, with her husband beside her and her daughter sleeping peacefully nearby, Clara Calloway finally understood that she deserved every bit of the happiness she'd been brave enough to claim.